The paradox of thought thinking about itself. Think about a thought. Anyone. I am tired. I have to improve. This cannot be real. The moment it appears, you believe it comes from you, that you have created it, you have supported it, you have wanted to say it. But stop for a moment. Have you chosen that thought? Have you consciously constructed its words? Have you provoked its arrival? Have you decided the moment in which it would appear? Or has it simply appeared? This is the paradox of thought thinking about itself. The disturbing possibility that your thoughts arise without your permission and then use your voice to convince you that you are their origin. That the mind, in its most familiar and intimate activity of thought, is not something that you do, but something that happens by itself without addressing anyone in particular. You may believe that you are the thinker of your thoughts, but examine it closely. Stay still, observe. You will discover that thoughts do not wait. They interrupt. They appear fully formed. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes painful, sometimes absurd. You could try to think intentionally to control the flow. But even the thought of thinking something specific arises spontaneously. There is no thinker who directs the orchestra, only the music that sounds by itself. This becomes more evident in moments of silence. You try to meditate. You pretend to rest the mind. And, nevertheless, thoughts continue uninvited, relentless. You tell them to stop, but even that order is another thought. The loop feeds itself. You're not directing the process. You are trapped in it like a wave in the ocean, trying to control the tide. Now reflect on what this means. If you're not the origin of your thoughts, then what is the self you claim to be? What part of you is deciding, directing, doing? And if thoughts think for themselves and then tell you that they are your thoughts, who or what is deceived? The implications are profound. Most of your suffering does not come from the world, but from thoughts. Anxiety, regret, shame, doubt. They are internal weather patterns, mental events that repeat in a loop. But as they say, I and mine, you believe that they are personal, that they reflect who you are. But if thoughts are autonomous, if they appear and disappear like clouds, why cling to them? Why let them define you? There is a space before thought, a silence after it, a witness who is not affected by the content of what arises. You have experienced it with amazement, in deep rest, in those brief moments in which you leave your mind and simply observe. That space is you, not the thinker, not the thought, but the consciousness underneath. There is the paradox. The thought says, I think, but that I is also a thought. Just another idea that adds to the process. There is no central thinker. There is no homunculus in the brain moving any threads. There are only thoughts that arise, claim credit, assert ownership, and deceive no one but themselves. Perhaps there has never been any thinker behind the thought, only the thought thinking by itself, only consciousness observing how all unfolds. Only you, not the voice in your head, but silence behind it, the only thing that never speaks and never lies. The paradox is the dreamer who cannot wake up. You have had dreams before. You have wandered through cities that never existed. You have spoken with people who are not real. You have felt fear, joy, even love, all while your body lay still in a dark room. And in those dreams, you believed. You accepted its logic. You responded to its rules. You thought everything was happening until something changed. A detail broke the illusion. The clock did not change. The hallway went around. The voice sounded strange. And at that moment, you realized it was not real. And so, without ado, you woke up. But what if this moment is another dream? What if waking up tomorrow is not really waking, but simply slipping into the next illusion, the next layer? What if you have never been awake, just going from one story to another, each convincing enough to forget the previous one? This is the paradox of the dreamer who cannot wake up. The terrifying possibility that consciousness is not the witness of reality, but its projector. That what you consider life may have no more foundation than last night's dream. Just another hallucination sustained by belief, memory, and impulse. A dream so deep that the idea of waking up has become just another part of the dream. Think about how many times your mind has been deceived. In a dream, you do not question gravity, identity, or time. You accept the absurd as normal. Your best friend can become a stranger. Your bedroom may be underwater. The sky can turn red and it seems strange to you. But you do not realize that you are dreaming because the dream creates a world that explains itself, just as waking life does. And now think about this. Everything you know about being awake depends on your senses. But your senses are not direct channels to reality. They are filtered, distorted, and limited. Your eyes only see a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Your ears only hear a narrow band of frequencies. Your skin only feels certain temperatures and pressures. Your entire experience of the world is stitched together from partial and noisy data that the brain cleans and turns into something fluid, coherent, and believable. But what if that coherence is the trick? The philosopher Descartes tried to demonstrate his own existence by saying, "I think, therefore I am." But he could not prove that the world existed outside his thoughts. He could not demonstrate that anything, not even his own body, was real. The only thing he knew for sure was that something was happening and that something felt like being. But if thoughts can be dreamed and feelings can be dreamed, and entire lives can unfold in the time it takes a neuron to fire, then what separates this moment of wakefulness from all the dreams that preceded it? Duration, logic, memory can also be simulated. You have dreamed entire lives in an hour. You have woken crying for emotions you never lived. And here is the crux of it. If you dreamed, how would you know? All the tests you perform would be evaluated within the dream. You would look at your watch, your surroundings, your memories. But all those are also elements of dream. There is no way to escape it using the tools that the dream itself provides. It's like trying to escape a story using the plot. You are inside it. You are subject to its rules, even to the rules that say, "This is real." So, what would it take to wake up? Would it be an event, a revelation, or death? And what if you woke up to what? To another layer, another dream, a higher simulation? What if there is no end? What if consciousness was a fractal of awakenings, each one believing that it is the last, each one unaware of the previous one? Herein lies a paradox. The dreamer believes in awakening. But what if there was no awakening, just a changing consciousness, eternally dreaming deeper into stories? You could reach the edge of an illusion, peel it off, feel the onslaught of freedom, only to discover that you're still dreaming, you are still watching, you are still inside. And perhaps that is the truth you've been looking for all this time, that you're not a person who dreams, nor a mind trapped in a false world. You are the dream itself, the canvas, the script, the witness, the illusion, the one who sees all things, and the one who is seen. And perhaps there's no awakening, just a moment when you realize that you never really slept. The paradox of the voice that lies within every truth. There's a voice inside your head that never stops talking. It narrates your life. It analyzes, criticizes, doubts, plans, praises, repeats. It tells you who you are, what you deserve, what to fear, what to expect. You trust it, or at least you live according to it. You think that voice is you. But have you ever wondered what it is? What does it come from? Why does it say what it says? This is the paradox of the voice that hides behind every truth. The understanding that the voice in your head, the one with which you most identify, is both your constant companion and most unreliable narrator. That it can speak entire novels of thoughts every day, shaping your identity and perception without offering any guarantee of truth, only the illusion of certainty. Let's start with its authority. The voice feels central, authoritative, and wise. It says things with conviction. You will never succeed. They don't really care. This is what I am. But where do these words come from? Were they born of objective facts? Or were they conditioned by years of repetition? Did you decide to think them? Or did they simply arise as a reflection from the deepest part of your programming? This voice didn't begin with you. It was constructed. As a child, you absorbed language, not only the words, but also the tone, cadence, and emotional charge. You absorbed the way your parents spoke to you, the way teachers corrected you, the way your friends laughed at you or praised you. Each comment, each moment was added to the script. And now, the voice endlessly repeats those scripts as if they were your own. But here is where it gets dangerous. The voice lies, not with malice, not even intentionally, but it is constantly wrong. It predicts catastrophes that never arrive. It assumes motives that do not exist. It invents meanings that are not there. It confuses feelings with facts. I feel anxious, so something must be wrong. I feel alone, so I'm not worthy of being loved. This is untrue. They are thoughts disguised as truths, and nevertheless, you accept them without questioning because the voice sounds very familiar, very convincing, very internal. And even when the voice speaks the truth, it does so selectively. It highlights your failures, but forgets your successes. It remembers your shame, but overlooks your resilience. It obsesses over things you cannot change, while ignoring the quiet beauty of the present moment. It wants to help you, protect you, prepare you, motivate you. But it does so by feeding you stories full of fear, doubts, and comparisons. And you confuse survival with wisdom. Now pause. If the voice is just a pattern, a habit of internal speech, what happens when you stop believing it? When you hear it say, "I can't with this," and instead of obeying, you ask, "Who says that?" You will notice something strange. The voice does not like being questioned. It stutters. It changes. It adapts because it was never conceived to be challenged. It feeds on you believing it. But who exactly is asking the questions? If the voice is in your head, who is listening? There is something more, something deeper, a silent awareness, a presence behind the noise. You glimpse it in stillness, in awe, in those rare moments when the voice goes silent and you feel the raw texture of life without commentary. That observer doesn't speak. It simply is, and therein lies a paradox. You have spent your life confusing the voice with yourself. You have believed its words, fought against its judgments, feared its predictions, but it has never been you. It was just a sound, a reflection, an echo of the past that danced in your inner space. And the more you identify with it, the more you lose the part of you that is not defined by thought, the part that observes without reacting, that lives without labeling. Perhaps the voice isn't your enemy. Perhaps it is just a well-meaning narrator with too much power. But if you confuse the story with truth, the voice with yourself, you will spend your life trapped in a narrative that was never yours. You will live as a character while your real self, the silent self, watches from behind the curtain, waiting to be discovered. And maybe, just maybe, the moment you stop listening blindly is when you start to wake up. The paradox of the mirror that reminds you of this. You pass before a mirror and see your reflection. Instinctively, you recognize that face. The features are familiar, worn by time, shaped by habit. That is you. You think it without hesitation, unstopping. But stop now. Look again. What makes that image you? What is it exactly that you recognize? Your body has changed. Your beliefs have changed. Your personality has evolved. The cells that formed your face 5 years ago are no longer there. And yet, the mirror still remembers. It still offers you someone to be. But who? This is the paradox of the mirror that reminds you. The disturbing understanding that your sense of self is tied to nothing fixed. And yet, it feels unshakably continuous. You change endlessly and keep saying I. But if nothing of you remains, what is it that remains the same? What does the mirror reflect if the original no longer exists? Let's start with your body. You look in the mirror and recognize the shape, the eyes, the mouth, the small details that link your identity to a form. But all the cells of your skin have been replaced. Your bones regenerate. Your hair falls, grows back, turns gray. Your organs deteriorate and repair themselves. You are not what you were. And yet, the illusion of continuity persists. You feel like the same person who was here 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even though that person no longer exists in any measurable way. Now look inside yourself. Look at your mind. Do you have the same thoughts, the same fears? Do you pursue the same dreams? Even your memories, the core of what you think you are malleable, fluid, reinterpreted each time they surface. You don't remember events, you recreate them. You don't carry the past with you. You carry a story about the past sewn from fragments colored by the present. And that story changes. It has to because you change. Your identity is not a portrait. It is an acting. And yet, here you are, remembering, recognizing, returning. The mirror continues to greet you as if nothing had changed. You keep saying, I, with conviction. You keep assuming that there is a center, a core, a self that persists behind all change. But where is it? Point it out, describe it. You cannot, because it is not a thing. It is a pattern, a rhythm, a memory that remembers itself. It becomes stranger. The mirror is passive. It does not think, it does not feel, it does not choose. And, nevertheless, it returns your image. It reflects the light, nothing more. And from that light, you extract meaning, identity, familiarity. But what if the mirror is not just a piece of glass? What if the world itself is a mirror? Each interaction, each look, each word that someone tells you, these two things reflect something. They give shape to your self-sense. And every time you look at them, you adjust, you refine yourself, you act. You become what the reflection expects. Here is where the paradox sharpens. You believe in a stable self because the mirror offers it. But the mirror lies. Or perhaps, more exactly, it shows a memory, not reality. A snapshot of who you were, not proof of who you are. And every time you look, you reinforce fiction. You say, there I am. But perhaps what you really want to say is, there is the story that I have not stopped telling myself. What if you stopped? What if for once you stood in front of the mirror and named nothing you see, without dragging the past, without remembering the history, the traumas, the ambitions, the family lines engraved on the skin? What if you looked and saw no one? Would it be terrifying or liberating? Because perhaps the truest reflection is not the one that confirms who you are, but the one that shows you how little you have needed to be someone. Perhaps you were never the face in it. Perhaps you were always the space behind the eyes, observing, changing, remembering, forgetting, and starting again without end. The paradox of the silent voice. Listen carefully, not the sounds around you, but the voice inside. The one that narrates your life, comments on actions, reproduces conversations, rehearses the future. That constant flow of inner dialogue seems like your core. You think with it. You identify with it. You assume that it is you. But what if it is not? This is the essence of the paradox of the silent voice. The idea that the voice you think is yours is simply a function of language, and that your true self could be hidden behind words, not inside them. Let's start with something obvious, but easily ignored. That voice always speaks in your native tongue. You don't think in images. You don't think in feelings. You think in words. But it wasn't always like that. When you were a baby, before learning language, you already existed. You already felt. You already responded to the world. But there was no voice narrating those moments. No commentary. Without internal dialogue. Then who were you? Who were you when the voice falls silent? Now think about this. If your internal voice depends on the language you learned, if it is molded by the vocabulary, the grammar, and cultural expressions, then it is not really yours. It is a tool, a borrowed system superimposed upon consciousness. You did not choose the words it uses. You inherited them, which means the very structure of your thoughts may not be yours either. If thought is molded by language, and language is molded by culture, then is your thought truly individual, or just a mixture of social programming? Even more disturbing is the illusion of authorship. When that voice says, I shouldn't have said that, or I hope they like it, it seems it is you who speaks. But try this. Sit in silence and observe the voice without intervening. Do not try stopping it. Just observe. What you will notice is that it goes on even without your intention. It worries. It plans. It criticizes. It fantasizes. It is more like a radio sounding in the background than a deliberate act of expression. It does not speak because you tell it to, but despite you. And nevertheless, you believe it is you. There is the paradox. If you can listen to your own thoughts, if you can step back and observe the interior voice, then who is listening? There's a you behind the voice observing it in silence. And that silent observer does not speak. It does not judge. Just observe. Which raises the question, what is the real you? The noisy voice narrating your life, or the silent consciousness listening to how the story unfolds. Spiritual traditions have explored this for millennia. In meditation, practitioners describe moments in which the voice is completely silenced, and, nevertheless, they remain fully conscious, fully alive, without language, without an identity. And in those moments, they often describe a deeper self. Not the I that speaks, but the one that simply exists. This is where it becomes even more disturbing. If the voice is not really you, then everything it says, every fear, every insult, every praise, is suspicious. I am not good enough. They do not love me. I will never be successful. They are not truths. They are thoughts, words that float through a mind trained to speak. But if the one that speaks is only a function, then the real you is not the one suffering those thoughts. It is the one observing how they happen. And suddenly, the identity to which you have clung, the one that is made of memories, judgments, and comments, begins to dissolve. Because if the voice is only noise, who are you without it? Who are you in silence? Perhaps this is the truth. The voice inside your head isn't you. It never was. It is only the echo of everything you have learned, repeated without ceasing, until you forgot that it was not yours. And your true self, the silent one, has been listening all along, waiting to be noticed. The paradox of the fictitious first person. Right now, as you read this, there's a sensation of looking from behind your eyes, a central presence, a narrator, a controller. You don't just process words. You feel like you're reading them. You are here, living the experience. But stop a second and try to find that look. Not conceptually, but physically. Where is it? Can you point it out? Is it behind your eyes, in your brain, or chest? The more you search, the more it disappears. This is the paradox of the fictitious first person. The disturbing understanding that what you take for granted may not exist as you believe, or perhaps not exist. Let's start with what seems the most basic assumption, that there is a self, a singular entity within your mind that thinks, decides, and observes. This is the first-person perspective. But neuroscience has a problem with that. When we scan brains, we do not find a control center, command module, or internal homunculus that operates the levers. What we find is a network of processes and systems that are activated in parallel, perceptions that come together, and decisions arising from unconscious calculations before the conscious mind is aware. In other words, there is no general manager in your head, just a committee pretending to be. Cognitive science has gone further. Experiments have shown that your brain makes decisions milliseconds before you are aware of them. You reach for a glass, and only then your mind creates the illusion that you made the decision. The conscious self is retroactive. It is not a cause, but narrator. Observe how the body moves, how thoughts arise, how words form, and then it takes credit. It weaves them into a coherent narrative that says, I did that, I did it. Think about split-brain experiments. When the corpus callosum, the bridge between the cerebral hemispheres, is cut, the two sides of the brain stop communicating directly. In these patients, each hemisphere can act independently, without one being aware of the other's actions. However, when one side acts, the other invents explanations, firmly believing that it made the decision. The illusion of unity remains. The fiction of a single I persists even when the system's fractured. So, if the I is just a narrator, a fictitious voice superimposed on a biological machine, what are you? Are you the body, the mind, or process? Or are you just the character in the story that the brain tells chapter by chapter, day after day? Now think about this. You never experience yourself directly. You don't see yourself. You don't hear yourself. You interpret a set of sensations and call it I. But that interpretation is constantly changing. You change the way you look when you are alone, when you are with others, when you are connected, when you are dreaming. The self is flexible. It adapts to context, meaning it's not fixed. It is not essential. It is a mask, one that changes so perfectly you forget that you are wearing it. Here is the paradox. If the I in first person is a story, a mental construction, then who is listening? Who hears the voice that says, Today I don't feel like myself? Who feels the conflict between what you do and what you believe you are? There is something beneath the model of the eye, something that observes how everything unfolds. But the moment you try to look directly at it, it escapes. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the eye is not something real, just a marker, a grammatical necessity in the sentence of consciousness, a fictional protagonist created. Thus, the story has someone to whom things happen. And if that is true, then maybe you are not the author of your life, not even the character. Maybe you are just the page that silently holds the ink, the paradox of the eye that observes how the eye dies. There's a moment, subtle and silent, that arrives without fanfare, but with a quiet recognition. You feel it when you're alone in a room in silence, or looking too long at your own reflection, or seeing someone you used to be fade into memory. It is the feeling that a part of you, a version of you, is gone, that you are no longer who you were. And yet, you are still here, observing intact. This is the paradox of the eye that observes how the eye dies. The strange recursive truth that you survive all the versions of yourself that you have been. And yet, you still call what remains I. The dreamer dies, but the dream continues. The mask is removed, but another face remains underneath. And every time the eye dissolves, some silent witness survives to see it. Think of the person you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or last week. Would that person recognize who you are now? Would he agree with your values, your priorities, and your regrets? In many ways, no. And yet, when you remember them, you don't think of them as a stranger. You say that was you. But was it? That person had different beliefs, different pains, different hopes. If another person told you those things now, maybe you wouldn't even recognize them. And yet, something endures through each disillusionment, each revelation, each silent ruin. Your roles have changed. Your story has changed. Your body, your face, your habits. Everything has changed. But something, a silent thread, remains intact. The observer, the one who says, I have changed, although I cannot specify how. But here's a twist. Even that observer is changing. Even the I that says, I am no longer who I was, is not the same I that said it last time. The observer is not a fixed entity. It is the function of consciousness, which adapts to the moment, a lens that reflects continuity, but never remains still enough to be captured. So what survives? Some say it is consciousness, pure and unconditional. Others say it is an illusion. The mind desperately needs to unite the changes in a single thread so that it does not fall apart. Maybe it's both. Perhaps the you that watches you die is nothing but a process only, a river that remembers its banks, even while it flows ceaselessly, never stepping twice in the same current. And what does this mean for death? If you have already died 1,000 psychological deaths and have survived them all, what makes the last one so different? You fear physical death because you believe it puts an end to the witness. But what if the witness has always been dying? What if every morning a new one wakes up in your place, inheriting the memory, carrying forward a sense of self, but silently, irreversibly different? Herein lies the paradox. The self dies again and continues to claim continuity. The eye of childhood, of heartbreak, of ecstasy, of despair, all disappeared, all buried in the flow of time. And yet, here you are saying, I am. But who? Which? For how long? Perhaps the self is not a being, but a becoming, a perpetual fall. And perhaps the only part of you that has never changed is the silent consciousness that observes how everything fades away, never clinging, never naming, never fearing loss, because it knows that what dies was never really you, and what remains never really began. The paradox of the rehearsed self. You enter a room, and someone calls you by your name. You respond instantly. You smile. You greet. Perhaps you even feel a flash of warmth or recognition. Everything happens so fluidly, so naturally, that you don't stop to question it, but you pause for a moment. That response, the voice, the expression, the posture, where does it come from? Did you choose it? Or did it simply happen? Was it an act of free will or a reflection trained over years of repetition? This is the gateway to the paradox of the rehearsed self. The disturbing idea that who you think you are might not be a conscious being, but a script, a memorized performance that unfolds so fluidly that the actor forgets that he is acting. Let's start with behavior. Much of what you do every day, like brushing your teeth, walking, writing, or even talking, is not deliberate. It is habitual. They are learned routines that an efficient, non-reflective mind executes. You don't think about how to form each word. You don't analyze how to smile. You simply do it because at some point, your brain created a model of yourself, of how you move, how you sound, how you react. And each interaction reinforces that template, refining it like a script polished after countless rehearsals. Now, let's think about identity. When someone asks you, "Who are you?" you may describe your name, your job, your beliefs, your preferences. But where do they come from? Were they carefully chosen or absorbed through experience? Weren't you born liking certain foods or fearing certain failures? Those things were learned, modeled, imitated. You watched others and adapted over the years until you became something coherent, something stable. But if you yourself have shaped yourself through acting and repetition, are you really you or just the role you've been assigned? Psychologists call this self-schema, the internal narrative you construct about who you are. But studies show that this schema is surprisingly flexible. Change your environment, companions, or context, and the self can drastically change. A shy person can become confident on stage. A skeptic becomes spiritual during a crisis. A leader collapses before uncertainty. And every time the mind rewrites the script, often without you realizing it. Even your memories, the very glue of identity, are unreliable. You remember yourself as coherent, evolving along a sensible timeline. But neuroscience reveals that memory is reconstructive. Every time you remember something, you don't recover it. You reconstruct it, modify it, filter it through your mood and current beliefs. In other words, your past self is a story that you keep editing, and your present self is a continuation of that fiction. So here is the paradox. If your sense of self is a rehearsed illusion built from habits, expectations, and narratives, then who is behind the curtain? Who directs the show? If the you that responds to your name, that laughs, that dreams, is just a role built over time, does you really exist? Or only layers of acting so rehearsed that they seem true? Even stranger, if your reactions, your thoughts, your emotions are written by past experiences, can you ever not play the role? Can you ever truly improvise? Or is everything, even your rebellion, your spontaneity, your dreams of being different, just another line in the script? And if that is true, then maybe the self that you think is real is not you at all. Maybe it's just the character you played for so long that you've forgotten it was acting. The paradox, the invisible past. Think about your first memory. Maybe it's a birthday party, a flash of color, a smell, a voice calling you from another room. Something fleeting, half-formed, wrapped in mist. But no matter how far you go back, there's always a wall, a border beyond which there is nothing, a void. And there is the question, if you can't remember it, did it really happen to you? This is the basis for the paradox of the invisible past. The disturbing idea that your life, your identity, your own sense of continuity could be built on something that you can no longer access, and that, therefore, might not belong to you at all. Let's start with childhood amnesia. Most people don't remember anything from before the age of 3, sometimes even 4. That means the very beginning of your life. The moment you first recognized a face, the first time you felt comfort or fear, the first word you said. Everything has been lost. You lived it. It shaped you, but it has completely disappeared. So is it still yours? Memory is what gives meaning to your life. Without it, there is no story, no before or after, just a series of unconnected moments. If I told you that your memories have been erased and replaced with someone else's, how would you know? If the content of your mind were altered while you sleep, would you still be the same person upon waking? Now, let's take this further. Every memory that you have has already gone through countless filters. The brain edits, erases, embellishes. You don't remember events as they happened. You remember them as you think they happened. Witnesses to a crime often remember very different details. Couples remember the same discussion in a contradictory way. Entire years can be misremembered, rearranged, or idealized. In other words, your past is not a fixed record. It is a story told in retrospect, unreliable, evolving, fragile. Here is the twist. If you cannot trust your memories and your early life is inaccessible, what proof do you have that your past is real? What anchors you to it besides belief? Documents, photographs, stories told by others? All of that is secondhand. You believe them because they fit, but you don't know it. And this opens a deeper abyss. What if your memories were fabricated? What if you were created 5 minutes ago and a lifetime of memories were implanted in you? Perfectly crafted, emotionally rich, historically coherent, but totally synthetic. It sounds absurd until you realize there is no evidence to refute it. All the tests you would try, checking your phone, calling a friend, opening a diary, would simply give results consistent with the implanted narrative. The illusion would defend itself. Philosophers call this the 5-minute hypothesis. It is logically possible that the entire universe, including you, arose a few moments ago, with false histories and physical evidence. There is no way to refute it. And if it cannot be refuted, then your certainty about your past becomes less of a fact and more of a faith. So here is the paradox. Your sense of self is based on a foundation that you cannot see, touch, or verify. You trust your memories. You believe in your past. But you live in a present that is always separate from it, always floating on the surface of a vast, invisible ocean of forgotten moments and reconstructed stories. And if the past is unknowable, how much of you is real? Are you the same person you were 10 years ago, or just someone who believes they were? Are you the result of real experiences, or just the echo of a story told so many times that you have forgotten it was fiction? Perhaps there is no past, only the now, only this. And everything you think came before is nothing more than a shadow projected by the mind. A beautiful and elaborate mirage of meaning that disappears the moment you try to touch it. The paradox of the inverted witness. Imagine for a moment that you're not experiencing the world, but the world is experiencing you. That what you consider your perception, your images, sounds, thoughts, and feelings, does not flow outward from a self of the world, but inward from the world to a self that does not exist as you believe. That you're not the observer, but observed. This is the paradox of the inverted witness, a subtle, disorienting twist in the way we assume consciousness works. It questions whether your consciousness is the source of perception or simply its product, a passive echo that pretends to be the origin. You have always been taught that you see the world, that light reaches your eyes, is processed by your brain, and becomes experience. But what if it were the other way around? What if what you consider sight, hearing, or even thought were simply the world collapsing into form through your nervous system, like an image that forms on a blank canvas only because there is something to reflect? What if consciousness were not the lantern that illuminates reality, but the mirror that passively captures everything that passes in front? Let's think about how experience arises. You don't choose what you see. You open your eyes, and the scene appears. You don't choose the next thought. It arrives without you asking for it. Even your attention, which seems like a voluntary act, often moves on its own. One moment you are reading, and the next your mind has wandered. Something else has taken control. Then, if you're not selecting your thoughts, who is doing that? And if you're not directing your perceptions, what is observing? This is where the paradox becomes deeper. You assume that your consciousness is fixed inside your skull as a spectator behind the eyes. But what if directionality is just an illusion? What if you are not seeing the world, but it is appearing through you, not as something that is out there, but as a construction in here, an inverted funnel where all stimuli collapse inward, giving rise to the illusion of a centered self? Some traditions describe this as non-duality, the idea that there is no subject or object, no self or world, only experience, only this without limits, without any observer. You're not a witness of life. Life witnesses itself through the temporal lens of what you call you. And if that is true, then the witness, the sensation of self behind the experience, is just another construction, a feedback loop. You hear your thoughts and assume someone is thinking them. You feel sensations and assume someone is feeling them. But what if there is no one there? Only sensation, only thought, only consciousness without owner, without center, only the illusion of a center created by the mind's habit of labeling. Everything, even itself. This is the inversion. You believe that you are behind the world, looking outward. But maybe there is no behind or outside, only the flow, the current. And the moment you try to get out of it and say, I am the one who is witnessing this, you have abandoned truth and entered the dream. So, think about this. If there is no witness, no observer, no self behind experience, who are you, really? Maybe you're not the eye that looks upon the world. Maybe you're the open sky, and the world simply passes through it. The paradox of a simulated soul. Think about this. What if everything that makes you you, your thoughts, memories, personality, beliefs, and even your quirks, could be replicated to perfection by a machine? Not only imitated, but copied with such detail that no one, not even you, could notice any difference. A perfect mirror, a synthetic twin. Would that copy be you? Or only something that carries your ghost? This is the paradox of the simulated soul. A chilling confrontation with the idea that your sense of being, an authentic self, may not be linked to anything fundamental, but rather to patterns. Patterns that can be duplicated, manipulated, or even manufactured from scratch. Let's analyze this. Neuroscience tells us that every emotion you feel, every memory you evoke, every dream you pursue, arises from the electrical and chemical activity in the brain. Thought is a process, emotion is a signal, personality a structure. And if that is the case, if the soul is not an immaterial essence, but a system of functions, then it is, in theory, programmable. Now imagine a future, or perhaps the present, in which a machine can replicate those functions. Not only imitate speech, but capture your style, your history, your values, your humor, your vulnerabilities. A language model trained using your texts. A digital avatar imbued with all your memories. A system that speaks with your voice, finishes your sentences, and remembers things you have forgotten. It behaves like you. It responds like you. It even gets sad when you do. So what is missing? The instinct is to say, it's not me because it doesn't feel. But what if it did? What if one day machines not only simulated emotions, but experienced a version of them processed through algorithms that imitated human cognition so well that there would be no real distinction? Would your refusal to call that consciousness be a philosophical stance or denial? Now, turn around. If a machine could be you without a body, what would that say about yourself now? Are you any less mechanical? You respond to stimuli. You execute routines. You have beliefs due to the information you received and patterns you reinforced. If an artificial intelligence could duplicate you, if it could replicate your love, your pain, your confusion, then perhaps what you call soul is not as unique as you think. Perhaps it's just an operating system with a very good narrative. And this is where the paradox runs deepest. If someone created a simulated version of you and that simulation began questioning its reality, would it be wrong? What if you were already a simulation? What if your memories were implanted, your environment designed, and your responses observed? You say that's science fiction, but you can't prove that it isn't either. All your experience is internal. All your reality is secondhand, filtered through perception, interpreted by a system you don't control. Some physicists and philosophers have taken this further, suggesting that the universe itself could be a simulation, that consciousness arises from code, not biology. If that's true, then you're already artificial, already generated, and the line between real and replica collapses. So ask yourself, if every part of you could be recreated by an advanced system, down to the microscopic pauses in your voice or the irrational fears you can't explain, what part could not be simulated? Would anything remain? Anything at all? Or have you always been a simulation pretending to be real? A set of neuronal echoes convinced of their own uniqueness? Perhaps your soul was never immortal, divine, or sacred. Perhaps they were just data running on a very convincing machine, the paradox of the uncreated self. Close your eyes for a moment and try to answer a question you've probably never seriously considered. Who would you be if no one had ever told you who you are? Strip your cells of your name, your nationality, your religion, your education, your values, everything instilled in you before you had the cognitive ability to consent to it. Without those traces, what remains? Do you still exist in any meaningful way? Or are you just the byproduct of what others believed, projected, and imposed? A self not discovered but constructed. This is the terrifying and destabilizing puzzle that lies at the heart of the paradox of the uncreated self. The idea that what you call you is not original, autonomous, or innate, but an elaborate inheritance of scripts, roles, and identities written by people who preceded you and imposed on you even before you knew what the word you meant. Think about your name. You didn't choose it. They gave it to you. And with it came a history, a culture, a language, a gender expectation. Before you could speak, people were already addressing you, labeling you, reacting to you in ways that reinforced what you were expected to be. If you cried too much, they told you that you were sensitive. If you smiled often, you were sweet. Little by little, these labels became your identity. You are very intelligent. You are too loud. You're always shy. The words were not neutral. They were shaping you. Your brain, still developing, interpreted them not as opinions, but as facts. And so, you began to conform. You interpreted the identity that had been given you. And as the acting was rewarded with love, attention, and validation, it became natural. But what if your true self was something completely different? Something that was repressed before having the opportunity to emerge. Now extend this to all layers of your life. Your religion, probably introduced by your parents, your values, reflecting your education, your fears, reinforced by experience, but born in culture. Even your idea of success, of beauty, of what is normal, all taught, absorbed, imitated. You are a mosaic of influences, a collection of absorbed contents that pretends to be a sovereign and singular identity. But if each piece of your personality can be traced to an external source, who is the one inside? Psychology calls this introjection, the unconscious adoption of the ideas, beliefs, and norms of others. This is how children internalize the voices of their parents, their culture, their environment. You start copying, and over time, you forget that you're copying. The voice in your head that says, I should be better, I'm not enough, I have to succeed, may not be your voice at all. It may be the echo of someone else's unmet expectations, silently dictating your inner life. And you, without realizing it, obey. This leads us to a disturbing conclusion. If your deepest self has always been shaped by others, how do you know that it exists independently? What if your most precious traits, your intelligence, your kindness, your ambition, are nothing more than adaptations, responses to external pressure, strategies to survive? And if that is true, then your authentic self might not be something you can discover. It could be something that never existed in the first place. Even attempts to rebel against this configuration are often illusions. Think of the teenager who rejects the values of his parents only to adopt those of his peers. Think of the adult who flees from conformity by embracing the counterculture only to find himself repeating a new script with different language. You tell yourself that you are choosing, but is it so? Or are you simply selecting from a menu of pre-approved identities, all as artificial as the previous one? Therein lies the paradox. If you are a product of influence, if every aspect of your identity is a reflection of something external, then what is truly yours? If you cannot point to a single thought, belief, or desire that has not been planted or shaped by another person, who are you? Are you a self or a collage? Are you a soul or a system of responses? And if one day you wake up and realize that everything was conditioning, every belief, every preference, every version of myself that you have had, What remains when all that is stripped away? Maybe nothing. Or perhaps the only true self is the consciousness that observes how the rest is built. The silent observer behind the mask that never had a name, never needed approval, and never played the game. But if that is true, if that stillness is the only real part of you, then everything you thought you were, your story, your identity, your pride, your pain, might not be the self at all. It could be the disguise. And maybe, just maybe, you spent your whole life playing a role in a play that you did not write for an audience that never existed. The paradox of the illusion of choice. You wake up and feel the freedom of the day ahead. You choose what to wear, what to eat, what to think about. You feel that you are in control, that you direct your life moment to moment through a sea of options. But pause. Go back to any of those decisions. Why did you choose that shirt? Why that breakfast? Why that thought and not another? The deeper you go, the more it seems that each choice is less a decision and more a domino that falls into place due to those that preceded it. This is the paradox of the illusion of choice. The disturbing realization that what we call free will maybe just a convincing idea a posteriori. A retroactive story that your brain tells itself to maintain the illusion of agency. In reality, you may not be choosing anything at all. Let's start with science. In a series of famous experiments, neuroscientists measured brain activity while participants made simple decisions, such as pressing a button with their left or right hand. What they discovered was amazing. The brain began to prepare for movement several hundred milliseconds before the participant consciously decided. The choice had already been made before the person was aware of it. In fact, in some studies, brain signals could predict the choice up to 7 seconds in advance. The conscious mind was simply the last to find out. A spectator who sees how a decision unfolds and then claims it as their own. Now, think about the implications. If your brain makes decisions before you're aware of them, then your sense of decision is a kind of illusion, rationalization superimposed on processes that you do not control. You say, I chose this, but what you really mean is, this happened and I think I chose it. You feel like the driver, but you may be the passenger turning the wheel long before your hands touch it. But things get complicated. Where do your preferences come from? Why do you like certain foods, certain people, certain ideas? You didn't create those tastes. They arise from your biology, your education, your environment, the music you like, what you have been taught, the moral values you have, what you have inherited. Even your deepest convictions are echoes formed in response to experience, not through pure, autonomous reasoning. You feel like you're choosing, but you're often just aligning with pre-existing patterns. Not even. Rebellion is safe. When you decide to go against the grain, to do the opposite of what is expected, you are still reacting. Your choice is defined by the same system you resist. It's not freedom. It is a different kind of obedience, a shadow projected backwards. This leads to a darker possibility. If your choices are just the end points of invisible chains, links of causality that go back in time, then your identity, your successes, your failures, your relationships, your regrets were never really yours too. Control. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your genetic wiring. You didn't choose the culture that shaped your mind. You are, in every measurable sense, a developing process, a living equation that solves itself over time. And yet, you feel free. You feel like you could choose differently. That feeling is the final trick. A post hoc illusion built into the architecture of consciousness. Because if you knew you had no control, how could you function? How could you take responsibility, make sense, feel hope? The illusion is necessary. It gives you a sense of authorship in a story that was never written, only read. So here is the paradox. If everything is caused, if every action is predetermined by prior conditions, then the self as a free agent is an illusion. But if that illusion is part of the system, if it is integrated into the experience of being human, then even your sense of freedom is just another effect of prior causes. There's no way out. Unless, of course, there's one. Unless the consciousness that is behind the thoughts, the silent observer who sees decisions arise, is not subject to causality, is not subject to choice, does not choose, but simply is. If that is the case, then perhaps freedom does not lie in what you choose, but in recognizing that there is no chooser, only consciousness, observing, waiting, letting go. And if that is true, then perhaps the greatest choice you will ever make is to realize you never had to choose anything at all. The paradox of the self observing itself. Imagine for a moment that you are in front of a mirror that does not reflect your body, but your mind. Each thought, each impulse, each fear, each desire projected on a screen in real time. You observe yourself thinking. You realize your own reactions. You observe your emotions as they arise and disappear. And in that act of observing, something strange begins happening. A division appears. There's a part of you that thinks and another that observes the thought. One is active, the other aware. Then the question arises, which of the two are you? This is the paradox of the self observing itself. A recursive loop buried in the heart of consciousness, where mind generates thoughts and becomes at once an observer of those thoughts. A loop so perfect, so intimate, that you often do not realize it exists. But once you do, the illusion of a unique, unified self begins to crumble. Let's begin with the experience itself. You have thoughts. I need to eat. I am angry. I am bored. These thoughts appear in your consciousness, often uninvited, and pass like clouds across the sky. But who perceives them? Thoughts are not the ones perceiving them. They're the objects being perceived. Therefore, there must be something else. Some witness presence that can observe what the mind produces without being its producer. That presence, the calm, silent, and wordless consciousness behind mental noise, feels fundamental, more you than any thought. But this is where it turns inward. Because as soon as you try to find that observer, describe it, name it, locate it, you fall back into thought. The moment you say, I am the observer becomes an object in mind, a thought, not a truth. You have turned the observer into observed. You have glimpsed the self and immediately lost it by trying to hold it. This loop reveals a fundamental flaw in architecture of self-awareness. You cannot fully observe the observer. You can only be it. And even that being is elusive. The moment you try to experience it as something apart from experience, it disappears. It's like trying to see your own eyes without any mirror, like trying to bite your own teeth. Philosophers have struggled with this for centuries. In Eastern traditions, it is called the illusion of ego, the belief in a separate self that thinks, feels, and acts. But what these teachings suggest is that the self isn't a thing. It is a process, a movement, an emergence of consciousness that creates the illusion of self through repetition and habit. You say, I think, but the thought happens. You say, I decide, but the decisions arise. You say, I feel, but the feelings arise by themselves. The self is just a grammatical trick, a placeholder that gives structure to what's essentially unstructured. Now, here is the disturbing twist. If the self is both the actor and observer, then it is also the mask and stage. There is no definitive you behind the curtain, just layers of observation, thought, sensation, all feeding each other like a hall of mirrors without an original image. Every time you think you have found your true self, what you have really found is a thought about you, a reflection, not the source, an echo, not the voice. So, who is the self that observes itself? Is it pure consciousness? Is it consciousness itself? Or is that also another construction, a last effort by the mind to define the indefinable? Therein lies the paradox. You are the only thing you can never fully observe. You are who is behind every experience. However, you have never truly experienced yourself. And if you cannot be known, not even by your own mind, then what are you? A ghost, a function, a flash of consciousness dreaming that it is awake? Perhaps the self does not exist. Perhaps it never existed. Only the observation, only the silent and endless observation of something that never existed. The paradox of memory inventing the present. You think you're living in the present moment, here and now. The sensations on your skin, the words you are reading, the awareness of your breathing. Everything seems immediate, undeniable. You think you're anchored in the now. But what if that belief is false? What if even this very moment, the one you are convinced is real, is already a memory the moment you experience it? This is the paradox of memory that invents the present. A mind-blowing revelation that what you call the present might not be experienced in real time at all. Instead, it could be a mental reconstruction, a memory that your brain assembles milliseconds after reality has passed. Which would mean that your whole sense of now is a simulation. A memory posing as presence, a shadow pretending to be substance. Let's see what neuroscience tells us. Your brain is not a live transmitter. It is a processor with a delay. It needs time, however brief, to register external stimuli. Light reaches your eyes, but your brain does not see it instantly. It needs time to translate the signals into images. The same goes for sound, touch, and even thought. Everything goes through a cascade of processing layers, which filter, interpret, and correct inconsistencies. And after all that, your mind presents it to you as the present moment. The world you see is not the world as it is. It is the world as it was disguised so that you perceive it as immediate. Now pause and assimilate it. You're always behind. When you react, what you react to has already disappeared. You live in a perpetual echo, a delayed reconstruction so perfect that you have never noticed the delay, but it is there. And if your present is always one step behind the real present, then what you experience as life is actually a reel of memories, a looped playback that convinces you that it is real. But it gets even stranger. Your brain not only processes experience, but invents it. Visual illusions demonstrate this. So do false memories. Witnesses confidently remember events that never happened. People remember childhood moments that were implanted in them through suggestion. You have misremembered conversations, dreams, even entire vacations. So what happens when delay combines with distortion? One obtains a present moment that is both late and unreliable. And nevertheless, we fully trust it. Even our emotions feel suspicious. When something startles us, our body reacts even before our mind is aware of it. Our heart accelerates. Our muscles tense. Then, the brain rushes to explain it away. I was afraid, but the fear had already passed by. We are retroactively assigning meaning to a past event. Everything is post-production. The experience is not primary. The explanation is primary. Now, consider the implications. If the present is memory and memories are malleable, where do you really live? Is it not the present, nor past, but something else entirely? A story written moment by a brain that guesses, corrects, and rewrites. Your own sense of time could seem artificial. A user interface designed not to show the truth, but to give you a functional illusion. And here's the most disturbing thing. If every moment is memory, and memories can be edited, erased, even invented without your consent, then your entire experience of existence is editable. You do not live in the world itself. You live in a version of the world that your brain thinks you need to see to function. A world filtered, delayed, and endlessly reinterpreted. A dream of reality that never stops dreaming. So what are you then? A person, a self, or simply a narrator sitting in a control booth, watching a looped playback of events that you have never really lived in real time and pretending that you are part of the action? Perhaps the present does not really exist. Perhaps it never has existed. Perhaps all you have known is memory, and all memory is fiction that forgot it was fiction. The paradox of a mind that cannot find itself. Take a breath. Now try to find your mind itself. Not just in theory. Really try now. Where is it, though? Behind your own eyes? Inside of your skull? Somewhere behind all your thoughts. You can point to your head, but that's just a gesture. You may feel your thoughts move, but that's just the feeling of thinking. So, where is the thinker, the source of thoughts, the seed of being? This is the paradox of the mind that cannot find itself. The disorienting understanding that what you use to examine reality cannot locate its origin. That your mind, the tool you trust to navigate existence, becomes elusive the moment it tries to observe itself. like a flashlight trying to illuminate its bulb or a knife trying to cut itself. The mind, when it turns inward, reveals only a strange, infinite void. At first, this seems like a simple trick. Think, of course I have mind. I am thinking right now, see? I am aware now. But consciousness isn't the same as location. You can feel hunger, but not the one who feels. You can hear thoughts, but never the one speaking. You experience sensations, beliefs, images, and memories, but never the one experiencing. That part remains silent, empty, and yet feels like you. It feels central, fundamental, real, but when looking directly, it disappears. Meditators throughout history have described this. The more they delve into inner silence, the more the limits of the self dissolve. Thoughts come and go. Feelings arise and disappear. But the self that supposedly controlled it never appears. The more they observe the mind, the more they realize that what they thought was a single thing is actually a current, a chaotic and incessant flow without a nucleus. And in that current, there is no thinker, only thought. Neuroscience confirms this fragmentation. There is no single place in the brain where mind resides. There is no center, no soul, only networks that are activated, sensory data that is processed, memories that are recovered, attention that is displaced. If there is a you, it's dispersed, decentralized. A process, not a person. A pattern, not a point. The brain doesn't generate a self as a factory builds product. It performs the self from moment to moment. Like a magician who performs a trick, he forgets that he is the one doing it. But the paradox runs even deeper. The mind that cannot find itself is also the mind that believes it is a self. It builds an identity, a timeline, a story, a feeling of control. It says, I am me, even if it fails to define what that means. It claims authorship of decisions, even though they arise from causes unseen. It insists on being real, although it remains impossible to locate. And in that contradiction lies the illusion that there is a you who thinks instead of thoughts simply occurring. This becomes clear when observing the mind in silence. Sit still, without distractions, and observe what happens. Thoughts arise uninvited. Memories are repeated. Judgments appear. Plans are formed. You haven't asked for them. You haven't chosen them. You have simply observed them. They arrive like the weather. And yet, the voice in your head says, this is me. But who observes that voice? Who observes the act of observing? If you go deep enough, the layers peel away until disappearing. It is not exactly a void. It must be absence of a center. There is consciousness. There is consciousness, but no one to control it. No one behind the cameras. Only the spectacle that represents itself for no reason. So here's the paradox. The mind insists on a self, but cannot find one. It builds an identity, then looks for its origin and finds only echoes. And if that is true, then perhaps the self that you feel so deeply was never meant to be found because it never existed. Only the sensation that it existed. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe it is the most terrifying understanding of all, that you're not a being with a mind, but a mind pretending to be a being. The paradox of the body that was never yours. You feel your body, the beating of your heart in your chest, the texture of the fabric on your skin, the tension in your jaw, the weight in your limbs, the air entering and leaving your lungs. You say things like my hand, my face, my body, as if they were yours, as if they belonged to you. But here's the disturbing truth. You did not choose this body. You did not build it. You did not choose its height, its sex, its skin, its DNA. You simply woke up one day, probably before you had words, and inherited it as if it were a garment already used, already aged. And since then you have been trying to convince yourself that this container is you. This is the paradox of the body that was never yours. The understanding that that with which you most identify is something over which you have had no voice or vote. And what is worse, that even now, while you live in it, you do not really control it. You influence it, you manage it, you respond to it, but you do not command it. You're not its owner. At best, you are its passenger. Start with the basics. You do not control the beating of your heart. You do not consciously regulate your digestion, your immune system, or your hormonal cycles. These essential processes, the ones that keep you alive, operate completely outside your consciousness. You breathe, yes, but most of the time not because you choose to. You eat when you're hungry. You sleep when tiredness overwhelms you. You get startled when you are scared. The body acts before the mind. It often acts instead of the mind. Then there is the pain. Undeniable, urgent, consuming. You do not want it. You cannot escape it. You can reason with it as much as you want. But when your body suffers, so do you. You're a hostage of a system that you do not completely control. And even when you are healthy, the body is constantly imposed. Its needs, its reactions, its aging. You cannot prevent time from rewriting your skin, your joints, your hormones, your energy. You can exercise, eat healthy, meditate, but your cells continue their course. Indifferent to your intentions, your body deteriorates. It betrays you. And nevertheless, you say, "This is me," but it goes beyond. Your own sensation of being inside a body is more fragile than you think. In out-of-body experiences, whether through trauma, meditation, psychedelics, or neurological failures, people say they see their bodies from above with indifference. In those moments, identity detaches from form. The sensation of "I am this" dissolves, and something else remains. Something without body, without space, but undoubtedly conscious. So, if you can exist without a body, how can the body be you? To this is added the malleability of body perception. Phantom limb syndrome shows us that the brain can continue feeling an arm after it has been amputated. The body persists in consciousness even when it no longer physically exists. Conversely, in certain neurological conditions, people disown parts of their body. They look at a hand or leg and say, "That is not mine." The wiring has changed, and also the property. If your connection to the body can break so easily, was it ever real? Now, think about the identity superimposed on the body. You look at yourself in a mirror and see yourself. But what do you really see? A face sculpted by genes that you did not choose. A structure molded by billions of years of evolution. You see your race, age, gender, and with it a history, social expectations, cultural baggage, political assumptions. But these two things were inherited, imposed. You did not create your body. You inherited an already written narrative and were told to play the main role. And still, the body deceives you. When you look at your hands, you feel they are yours. When you speak, the voice that comes out seems like yours. You identify with the sensation. You reduce consciousness to property. But property implies a distinction, a separation between the owner and what's possessed. And if you cannot exist without the body, and the body cannot exist without you, then who exactly is the owner of whom? There is the paradox. The body is what you most intimately inhabit. However, it is also what is most foreign to you. You did not create it. You do not control it. And you will not keep it. One day it will disappear. And the you that has observed it throughout life will face a terrifying question. If you were never the body, what were you? Maybe you were never in the body. Maybe you were just visiting. Maybe the body was the disguise, and the real you, the silent, observant, and shapeless consciousness. Was it the actor behind the stage lights? But if so, the representation has lasted so long that you have forgotten it was a role. You have begun to believe that the mask is your face. And now, even when the curtain begins to fall, you keep whispering, "This is me." The paradox of a self that could be anyone. Look at yourself in the mirror. Really look at yourself. What do you see? You see a face, of course. Familiar, perhaps comforting, perhaps conflicting. You recognize your features, your posture, your expression. And somewhere within that recognition, you say, "That is me." But here is a disturbing question. Why are you you? Why not some other person? Why this body, this history, this mind, and not another? Why were you born into your life and not into one of the thousands of millions of bodies that you have crossed on the street, seen in photographs, or read about in books? This is the paradox of the self that could be anyone. The disturbing realization is that there is no identifiable reason why you are you. That the limits of your identity only seem solid because you have never experienced being another person. And if you had, if your memories, your culture, your thoughts, your DNA were slightly different, you would believe in that version of reality with the same confidence as you believe in this one. Think about it. If you had been born in another country, with other parents, speaking another language, educated with other customs, you would have a different perception of yourself. And you would still call yourself you. You would have other values, other preferences, other beliefs. Not because you had chosen them, but because they would have been transmitted to you. But in that alternative life, you would feel just as safe, just as anchored, just as convinced of your reality. The illusion of being yourself would remain intact. Now, think about this. When you were born, you had no name, no gender identity, no nationality, no religion, no history. You were pure experience, sensation without labels. The you that you now take for granted was built slowly over time, like scaffolding around an empty space. People called you by a name, and you started responding to it. They told you who you were: good, bad, intelligent, difficult, and you absorbed those labels until you ended up confusing them with intrinsic truths. But they were circumstantial. They were arbitrary. In another life, you would have been a different person, and you would have believed it with the same conviction. This leads us to a stark truth. Your identity seems essential, but in reality, it is contingent. It depends completely on variables that you did not choose. Where you were born, what language you first heard, who raised you, in what culture you were raised, what traumas shaped your nervous system. You did not choose your initial conditions. You were thrown into a specific body in a specific environment at a specific moment. And from that seed, your entire concept of self grew. But if the soil had been different, the plant would be unrecognizable. Even your memories, which you think define you, are unstable. You forget more than you remember. You remember incorrectly. You reinterpret. You dream, and nevertheless, you build an identity on this sand, insisting that it is made of stone. This is what I am. But what if that is just what the current version of your brain believes, based on inputs over which it had no control? And here comes the strangest twist. Other people feel exactly the same. The stranger who passes by your side at this moment is as sure of his identity as you are of yours. He lives within his own narrative, with his own logic, his own emotional terrain. For him, you're the stranger, the secondary character, the blurry stain in the crowd. And from his perspective, your identity, everything you feel so deeply, is nothing more than a passing detail in the landscape of his reality. So who is right? Who is real? Herein lies the paradox. Either everyone is real in exactly the same way, which means that your identity is not special or privileged or unique, or no one is really real in the way they believe they are. In both cases, the center collapses. The idea of a fixed, permanent, and indivisible self becomes untenable. You start to suspect that you are not a single thing, but a perspective, one that could easily be assigned to anyone, anywhere, and that would be just as valid. Perhaps you do not exist. Only consciousness exists, which was a disguise for a while. Perhaps consciousness does not belong to you. Perhaps it simply flows through different lenses, telling different stories. And if that is true, then it is not you for something essential. It is you because of the place from which you look, but if you change the lens, the story changes. And the self also changes, the paradox of a life that you never chose. Every morning, you wake up and resume the same life. You remember your name, your past, your responsibilities. You remember who you were supposed to be, where you belong, what you want, what you fear. You resume the thread of your identity as if it were a coat that has remained on the chair overnight. But have you ever stopped to wonder if you chose this life? Not only the daily routines or the goals that you have set for yourself, but all the scaffolding that is underneath. Your desires, your memories, your values, your own sense of life. This is the paradox of the life that you never chose. The revelation that the existence you claim as yours might not be the one you really chose. That from the beginning, the trajectory of your life was built on decisions you never made. And that what you call your path may have been paved by forces so subtle, so distant from your control, that you have confused inheritance with agency. Start with your birth. You did not choose it. You did not choose your parents, your body, the chemistry of your brain, or your place of birth. And yet, every moment of your life since then has developed from that unchosen starting point. Your first language, your cultural norms, the beliefs that were instilled in you before you could think critically. All of this has shaped the lens through which you have experienced the world. They even taught you your definition of freedom. You did not design the framework. You only learned to live inside it. Now think about your preferences. The food you like, the music that excites you, the people you are attracted to. Do you think you created them from scratch? Or were they subtly conditioned by repetition, exposure, reward? What seems beautiful, exciting, moral to you, all of it resonates, influences you, and you have absorbed it unconsciously. You think you chose to become the person you are. But the raw material of that person, your instincts, your fears, your sense of identity, was given to you long before you knew what a choice was. And your ambitions? The goals you pursue with such conviction, the achievements for which you sacrifice yourself? Where do they come from? Did you wake up one day and decide that those things mattered? Or was it your environment, your family, your school, your media that placed those desires inside of you so gradually that you assumed they were innate? A child who is born in a war dreams of security. A child who is born into wealth dreams of finding meaning in life. But neither of them chose that dream. The world whispered it to them. Even your personality, that sacred set of traits that you defend and with which you define yourself, is largely reactive. Are you introverted, or have you been hurt by rejection? Are you ambitious, or are you trying to prove something to a parent who has never approved of you? Are you kind, or have you simply learned that kindness gives you security? What you consider a stable personality may be a map of survival strategies, not a reflection of an eternal essence. And so you live, you plan, you fight. But what you fight for, the very direction of your life, may have been set in motion a long time ago by invisible forces, by algorithms, by family systems, by economic structures, by genetics, by traumas. And yet, you keep going saying, "This is my life." But is it? Here is the paradox. You think you are the author, but you were born into a story already being told. And the voice with which you write, the voice in your head, is a voice trained by those same forces. Even your rebellions are predictable. Your resistance, your longing to be free, your impulse to be unique. They also follow a script, one written before you were old enough to read it. So what remains? If you did not choose your birth, your body, your mind, your desires, if the whole arc of your life has developed following a path that you did not trace, what part of it can you really claim as yours? And here is the strangest twist of all. The mere fact of questioning all this was not your choice, either. The doubt, the awareness, the longing to break with the script arose without you asking, like everything else. It was not you who invoked the impulse to awaken. It appeared, and now you're here reading these words, wondering what is real, wondering if any of this is yours. Perhaps the only freedom you have is the moment when you realize how little free you have been. Perhaps the only true awakening is the one that strips you of all illusions of control and shows you what you are. A flame trapped in the wind. It was not she who created the fire that keeps burning, keeps dancing, and keeps looking for meaning in a life that was never really yours. The paradox of the observer who cannot leave. Imagine for a moment that your whole life is a movie, a projection unfolding on a screen. The people you meet are actors. The events you experience are scenes. The world itself is a set, meticulously constructed. And you are in the audience, watching silently, motionless, aware. You cannot pause the movie. You cannot fast forward. You cannot intervene. All you can do is observe. And no matter how chaotic or beautiful the scene becomes, you cannot look away. You are trapped in your own testimony. This is the paradox of the observer who cannot leave. The disturbing realization that the most stable part of your existence, the one that sees everything, the one that observes without speaking, without acting, without changing, is also the most confined part, the least free. It is always there, always observing, but never participating, never touched by the action, never authorized to go on stage. We consider ourselves agents, decision-makers, drivers, doers, but if we strip away that identity, if we go beyond personality, what remains is something without words, passive, motionless, something that simply is. Call it awareness, presence. It is what never sleeps, even when the body does. It is the eye behind the mind, the listener behind the thoughts, the one to whom everything happens, but who cannot make anything happen. This presence, the observer, never speaks and yet is aware of every word. It does not feel the emotions directly, but it sees them arise and fade. It does not remember, and yet it observes the memory. It has no form, and yet it is the backdrop of every experience. And in its silence, in its refusal to participate, it becomes something like a prisoner. It cannot leave the theater. It cannot shout at the actors. It cannot warn, cry, or laugh. You can only observe, and you must do so. You have felt this before. In moments of crisis, when you dissociate, in moments of amazement, when time vanishes. When you say things like, I saw myself doing that. Who is the I that observes? Who is the self that's observed? That division between the one who acts and the one who sees is the fracture that reveals the paradox. You are both, and yet the observer seems somehow more you than the person acting. Because the actor changes, gets scared, becomes proud, feels ashamed, rejoices. But the spectator never flinches. Meditation traditions have long been pointing out this paradox. If you stand still long enough, the noise of thoughts begins fading. What remains is pure consciousness, without filters, owner, or limits. And yet, however peaceful it seems, it is also powerless. You sit, observe, but you cannot control what you see. Thoughts arise without order. Emotions burst without permission. The mind, like a storm, does what it wants. And the observer simply witnesses. Now imagine this condition not for an hour, not for a lifetime, but for all eternity. A witness without power, voice, or escape. He sees everything. He understands everything, but he can never act. He can never enter the world. He can never change the script. Is that enlightenment or imprisonment? And here is the twist. You will never be able to know what it is like to be outside the observer, because all the experiences you have had, even the illusion of doing, choosing, speaking, have been filtered through his gaze. You have never left him. You can't. There is no outside to compare it with. The observer is not seeing reality. The observer is your reality. Herein lies the paradox. The most essential and immutable part of you, the one that is always present, always aware, is also least able to influence the life it perceives. He sees everything, but touches nothing. It is the only constant in a sea of change. And yet, it is not a self, soul, or person. It is consciousness itself, without preferences, direction, or name. Perhaps that is why we cling so desperately to the illusion of control. Because somewhere inside us we feel the truth that the deepest part of us is sitting forever in the back row of a dead-end theater. Watching a movie we haven't written. Watching a character we haven't chosen. Watching a life we cannot escape. And we keep watching, always seeing the paradox of the person we pretend to be. Every day you wake and get into your character. You get dressed, look in the mirror, rehearse your lines. You play your role at work, in conversations, in private thoughts. You smile when it is expected. You minimize when it is safe. You exaggerate whenever it suits you. You adopt the appropriate tone, put on the correct expression, project the appropriate emotions, and the world responds with approval, rejection, or indifference, reinforcing the illusion that character is you. But deep down, beneath the performance, a silent concern begins to stir. What if I am not who I pretend to be? What if I never was? This is the paradox of the person you pretend to be. The chilling realization that the self you present to the world, the one you have carefully built over years of social cues, comments, and silent self-correction, may not be a reflection of your inner truth, but a mask that you have worn for so long that you have forgotten what your face is like beneath it. Begin with your earliest memories of acting. You were a child, sensitive to the emotional atmosphere around you. You learned to smile when adults smiled, to cry less if that earned praise, to shut up if your voice exposed you to punishment. You absorbed this dance long before you understood it, adapting your behavior not out of manipulation, but from necessity. You learned who received attention, who was ignored, who was loved, and who was forgotten. And little by little, piece by piece, you build a personality that provided security. You learned to become the kind of person people wanted, even if that wasn't you. And that's where the mask began to take hold. Not as a lie, but as a natural survival mechanism. It was natural because it worked. But over time, the mask became your identity. You began to identify with your performance, your strengths, your story, the role you played in others' eyes. You began to confuse acceptance with authenticity. You were not being true to yourself. You were being true to the version of yourself that was most liked. And the world rewarded you for it. Promotions, friendships, compliments, recognition. And every time you received a reward, you confirmed your performance. You began to believe that the role was real. I am safe. I am responsible. I am adorable. But who are you when no one sees you? Who are you when there is nothing to gain from being good? What happens to your identity in a dark room without an audience or comments? Most people never find out. The performance never stops. Even in solitude, the internalized gaze of others remains. You ask yourself, what would they think if they saw me now? You imagine how you will retell your experiences. You pose even in your own mind. You act for an imaginary audience, an echo of all the people who have shaped your need to be enough. And so, the paradox arises. To be accepted, you became someone else. But in order for you to be seen as you are, you would have to stop pretending. However, the longer you act, the more terrifying it becomes. What if your true self is unimpressive? What if your true self is not worthy of love? What if your true self doesn't even exist? What if under the mask, there is only silence? You begin to realize that you have spent your life polishing a statue. Beautiful, admired, empty, and behind it is the one who has been watching everything, who has never spoken, who has never lied, who is not chosen, but simply exists. So here is the paradox. To find yourself, you must first stop pretending to be everything you have been. But doing that risks losing everything that made you feel safe, your status, your relationships, your identity. You must take off the mask, not only in public, but also in your mind. You must dare to exist without explanations, character, or disguise. And perhaps, under the rehearsed charm, the carefully constructed story and armor of sympathy, there is something quieter, more fragile, less polished but real. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the only you that has really mattered. The paradox of the reality that needs you to exist. You assume that the world is out there, solid, stable, and independent of your presence. The trees keep growing, whether or not you look at them. The stars remain fixed in the sky, whether or not you look up. Reality, you believe, is indifferent to your consciousness. It was here before you were born. It will continue to exist after you are gone. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the world you perceive, the totality of your sensory experience, is not something you observe, but something that arises with you? What if reality, as you know, it does not exist without you? Not because you are special, but because you're necessary for it to appear. This is the paradox of the reality that needs you to exist. The disturbing idea that the world, as you know, it is not an external, objective thing waiting to be discovered, but a co-creation of your consciousness. That without an observer, reality is not simply invisible. It is undefined. And if that is true, then your role in the universe is not passive. It is generative. You are not a witness to the world. You create the world by witnessing it. It begins with perception. What you call the world is nothing more than the interpretation of signals. Light enters your eyes, but you do not see light. You see colors, which do not exist in reality. It is the translation that your brain makes of the wavelengths. You do not hear the air vibrate. You hear sound shaped by your auditory system, contextualized by memory. The world has no color or noise, nor is it full of meaning. You add that to it. You do not experience the world directly. You experience your version of a world, a filtered and constructed simulation that runs on neural hardware. Now, think about how fragile that simulation is. Change the chemistry of your brain, and reality changes. Under the effects of psychedelic substances, the ground breathes, time curves, and objects melt. Under the effects of anesthesia, the whole world disappears. Under trauma, a face becomes a threat. Under love, the same face becomes security. Reality is not fixed. It adapts to the mind that perceives it. Quantum physics takes this even further. At a subatomic level, particles behave differently when observed. In the famous double-slit experiment, a particle is not only a particle. It exists in a state of probability until measured. The act of observing collapses possibilities into a single result. It is as if the universe itself waits to be seen before deciding what it is. Reality is not fixed until a mind interacts with it, until someone or something looks at it. So what does that make you? Not only a person inside a world, but the point at which the world becomes real. You're not inside the room. The room is inside your consciousness. Without consciousness, there is no room, no color, no form, no space, no time. Those things are not found in the world. They are projected by the mind, like a lens that curves light to form an image. But here is where the paradox intensifies. If your perception creates reality, how can you know what is real? How can you separate the world from the way your brain constructs it? The answer is that you cannot. You're trapped in a loop. The world needs your mind to exist as something perceptible, but your mind cannot access anything outside the world it perceives. You are the painter and painting, trapped in an infinite loop of appearances. And, nevertheless, the illusion persists that there is something objective, something stable, something real. We cling to this illusion because it comforts us. It suggests permanence. It offers the possibility of certainty. But the more you delve, the more it dissolves. There is nothing behind the appearance. There is only process. There is only experience. There is only dance between subject and object, collapsing one into the other until neither can be found. So here is the paradox. The reality in which you believe so deeply that you navigate, suffer, and hope in cannot exist without you. Not because you are the center of the universe, but because there is no universe as you know it without a center. And you are the center through which everything appears. Perhaps this means that nothing is real. Or perhaps it means that everything is real, but only because you are here to witness it, not as a spectator, but as the threshold through which existence takes shape. And when your consciousness fades, so does this world. Because the world was never something you were in. It was always something happening in you. The paradox of truth. You can never hold on to it. You seek the truth. It feels like a noble instinct, the desire to understand, to discover what is real. Under all the appearances, distractions, and noises. You read. You question. You think deeply. You strip away the illusion, the contradiction, the half-truths. You want clarity, something solid, something definitive. You want to know once and for all what is true. But the more you delve, the more ground shifts. Each answer opens a door to more questions. Each insight casts its own shadow. And suddenly, what seemed like an advance begins to seem like a spiral, a descent toward an understanding that lurks at the limits of all. Understanding. What if truth is not something that can be found? What if it is something that cannot be reached? This is the paradox of truth. You can never reach the disturbing certainty that the mere act of seeking the truth can make it impossible to reach. That truth dissolves when pursued directly. It resists containment. It rejects finality. It is like trying to catch a reflection with your hands. The closer you get, the further it moves. Start with basics. What you see, hear, and think is filtered through a body and brain molded by evolution to prioritize survival, not truth. Your senses are limited. Your memory is fallible. Your mind is partial. You see what you expect. You hear what fits your narrative. You believe what makes you feel safe. And when information threatens your identity, you resist it. Not because it is false, but because it destabilizes you. Your mind does not seek truth. It wants comfort disguised as knowledge. Even language, your main tool for expressing truth, is an approximation, a map, not the territory. Words can describe feeling, but never convey it fully. They can point to reality, but never encompass it. Each sentence omits something. Each concept simplifies. The moment you define something, you reduce it. And in doing so, you lose what made it complete. Think about philosophy. Thousands of years, thousands of minds, and nevertheless, there is no consensus. Each answer creates new counterarguments. Each conclusion is temporary. Even the wisest thinkers contradict themselves over time. Not because they are wrong, but because they are human. Because consciousness in itself is not built to contain truth, only to pursue it, question it, reach it, and spin endlessly around the mystery without ever reaching its core. Science tries to offer us stability, empirical observation, testable theories. And yet, the more we look, the stranger things get. Particles are not just particles. Time is not constant. The observer changes what's observed. At the smallest levels, reality does not behave. It flickers between possibilities. It blurs into probability. It turns out that the universe might not be made of things, but of information, of relationships, of pure uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, truth does not become a thing, but a process, not a destination, but a movement. Even in your own life, the truths you've clung to have changed. You have believed in things that were then shattered. You have doubted things that proved to be real. You have rewritten your history 1,000 times. What once was the truth about yourself, about others, about what matters has evolved, deteriorated, transformed, and will continue to do so. Not because you are wrong, but because you are alive. Because being aware is changing. There's the paradox. You seek the truth as if it were fixed, eternal object, independent of you. But the truth is not an object. It is a mirror, and every time you look in it, what you see is shaped by who is looking. Your beliefs, your questions, your fears, your hopes. In other words, the truth is never separate from a seeker. You don't find it, you generate it. And since you are always changing, so too does the truth. Perhaps that is why no truth seems definitive. Because the part of you that recognizes truth is the part of you that cannot stop moving. You are the question and the one asking. You are the map and the traveler. And the moment you try to stop to affirm that you have found the answer, you lose your way. Because the truth is not behind you. It is not in front of you. It is in the turn. And perhaps the only real truth that you can cling to is that you never can. The paradox of the voice that says, I. There's a voice in your head that speaks in first person. It says things like, I want, I feel, I am. It narrates your life so convincingly that you never stop to wonder what it is or where it comes from. You simply take it for granted that it is you. But is it? Who or what is really saying I? What does that little word really refer to? This is the paradox of the voice that says I. The disorienting understanding that the speaker you think is the center of your being may not exist at all in the way you think. That the I to which you refer may be nothing more than a linguistic illusion, a marker for a self that has never been found, only assumed. Start with the word itself. I is just a pronoun, a symbol. It points to something. Okay, but to what? You use it constantly and reflexively. I am hungry. I remember. I have to clear things up. But a question hides under that surface. Who is the I in those sentences? When you say, I remember, it is taken for granted that there is a subject who remembers something. But if you look closely at the memory, there is no subject apart from the process itself. The memory arises, it reproduces. It fades away. The I doesn't produce it. It simply appears, then the voice claims it. This happens with everything. A thought arises in mind. You have not invoked it. It simply appears. An emotion floods your body. You did not decide to feel it. It has simply arisen. And yet, after the fact, the voice says, I thought this or I feel that, as if it had authored the experience. But what if it weren't like that? What if that I is only adhering to the flow of experience? like a narrator who intervenes to take credit for events unfolding on their own. Now think about what happens when you try to find the I, not intellectually, but experientially. Stay still. Direct your attention inward. Look for the self supposedly behind your thoughts. You may find thoughts about yourself, images, concepts, emotions, but none are you. They are things you're aware of. So, where is the one aware? You will discover that there is no place for it. There are no limits, no form, only awareness. Open, ungraspable, without center. The self that you have always taken for real turns out to be more a point of reference than a person, a convenient pronoun for a process, a way of organizing narrative, but not a thing, not a self, not an entity. And yet, the illusion persists because the voice is convincing. It not only speaks, it speaks like you. Remember your past. Plan your future. Rehearse conversations. Judge. Dream. Compare. And with each phrase, it reinforces the idea that someone is doing all this. Someone in command, someone behind the curtain. But the moment you try to find that person, there is no one there. That is why spiritual teachers and mystics of all times have insisted that the ego, the personal self, is an illusion. Not because you do not exist in any sense, but because the version of yourself that says, I is a construction, a set of memories, habits, perceptions, and language, a pattern, a simulation that runs within consciousness and is confused with the whole. And this is where the paradox sharpens. You need the voice. It helps you navigate world. It organizes experience. It allows you to function socially. Without it, you could not survive. But you are not the voice. You are the space in which the voice appears. You are the silence that interrupts. You are the witness of the thought, I am, and therefore you are not who thinks it. So, what happens when you see through the I? Does everything dissolve? Do you become nothing? No. You become what remains when illusion ends. Presence, openness, being without center, a vast field of experience in which life unfolds, without narrator, name, or anyone to own it. And perhaps that is the final twist. The voice that says, I is not wrong. It is simply misinterpreted because what you are cannot be put into words. It can only be lived in silence, without a doubt. Now, the paradox of a self that survives death. Every night, when you fall asleep, the world disappears. Your thoughts fade. Your consciousness fades. Your sense of self, your goals, your memories, your identity fade into silence. And for a time, however long, you cease to exist as a person. There is no you to experience the passage of time. There is no you who remembers being absent. And then, hours later, something stirs. A flash, a return. You wake up and the self recomposes itself. Your name returns. Your story resumes. You blink at the light and say, here I am. But where were you? This is the paradox of a self that survives death. Every night, the silent existential mystery in the heart of everyday life. That every time you sleep without dreaming, the self disappears completely and you don't realize it. And yet, when you wake up, you consider yourself a continuous whole. You say you have slept, but that is not entirely true. You are not there to experience the dream. You only remember falling asleep and waking up. So what exactly makes you believe that you have persisted in between? Think about this. If someone told you that you had been dead for 7 hours and have returned without any memory of that lapse, would you argue it? Could you prove otherwise? What makes you feel intact when you have completely disappeared? Not only by experience, but by consciousness itself. We often fear death as something unknown, a permanent silence. But every night you encounter a form of it, without dreaming, without imagining, without existing. And you wake up without horror, but rested. You don't cry for the you that has disappeared. You don't wonder if you have really disappeared. Why? Because your mind softens the void. Write the story. I slept, but the story is a patch, a placeholder, a memory sewn to a void. Now, here's where it deepens. If yourself can disappear every night without any trauma, what does that say about its reality? Is it really essential? Is it just a process that turns on and off, a pattern, not a presence? And if the pattern can be stopped, so easily, so completely, without resistance, then how real is what you think is always there? People often say, I am afraid of dying because I cannot imagine not existing. But you have already ceased to exist. You have experienced unconsciousness thousands of times. You have disappeared without you realizing. And the you that wakes up every morning never wonders if it is the same. It simply continues the representation. It picks up the script, re-enters the role as if no scene had been missed. But what if you're not the same? What if the I that wakes up is not the same that fell asleep? Just a new instance of the process that repeats seamlessly because memory fills the void. Would you know it? Could you know it? You assume continuity because it is comforting. But every night that assumption is questioned, and you ignore it. And there lies the paradox. You experience a temporary annihilation every night, and yet you wake up with a sense of permanence. You disappear completely and return without questioning who or what has returned. You say, I have slept, but in reality you have left, and someone else has remembered the return. Perhaps the self is not a flame that burns eternally, but a match that is lit again and again, a spark that forgets its own absence, a brief light that shines in the world without knowing that it was once dark. And if that is true, then death, the one that we fear so much, might not be a stranger. It could simply be the dream from which we never wake. And the self that we never realize has disappeared. The paradox of identity. We build to escape ourselves. We tell ourselves stories, not just once, but constantly, silently, every day. Stories about who we are, what we have done, what we want, what we are worth. You build these stories like armor, layering experiences, explanations, symbols, achievements, failures, desires. You create a self, not all at once, but moment to moment, thought to thought, memory to memory, and you feel it necessary. You feel it as a form of survival. But here's the strange thing. The more detailed the story becomes, the more you feel you are hiding in it. And there lies the paradox of the identity that you build to escape yourself. The understanding that the person you think you are may be a construction designed not to reveal who you are, but to protect you from discovering it. That yourself is a kind of shield, not against the world, but against the terrifying absence of anything solid beneath it. Let's start with why you build an identity. You are born into the world as pure consciousness. Without words, without thoughts, without categories, only sensations. You don't know who you are. You don't need it. And then, little by little, the story begins. You are a girl. You are intelligent. You are shy. You're like your father. You do not write these lines. You inherit them. And as you grow, you internalize them. You turn them into roles. I'm a funny one. I'm a hard worker. I am not worthy of love unless I am useful. Identity becomes a mask that makes you deserve love. But it is also a mask that prevents you from disappearing. You embody the identity until it feels natural. People expect it. You trust it. You don't wonder if it is true. You just try to make it all work. But somewhere deep, under the mask, there's a question that you rarely dare to formulate aloud. What would happen if I stopped being this person? Who would I be without the performance, without effort? And this is where the paradox gets deeper. One builds an identity to feel safe, for life to feel predictable, to feel seen. But the more you commit to the role, the more you begin to lose parts of yourself that do not fit into the script. You edit, erase, pretend, and soon, you are no longer building yourself. You are building a cage. Worse still, that identity, the one you protect, becomes a source of suffering. You feel stuck, not because you are, but because you are terrified of what will happen if the story ends. You feel invisible, not because nobody looks, but because the version of you that they see is no longer real. You yearn for freedom, but it is your own identity that keeps you from leaving. This is the part that nobody tells you. The self that you have built, the one you defend, adore, and explain, is just an approximation, a narrative, a mask. And every time you look in a mirror and see an immutable self, you contemplate a reflection that was never yours. It was created by circumstance, shaped by fear, and defined by what you believe you had to be. So, what happens if you just let it go? That's where it becomes scary. Because the moment you stop clinging to identity, you face what it was meant to protect you from. The emptiness. Not depression, nor failure, but the pure lack of form, without script, without labels, without ground to tread on, just pure being, without script and vulnerable. And yet, maybe that is not emptiness. Maybe it's space, the space before the story, the space where you can be not like someone, but like something unnameable. Maybe who you really are is not the character. It is the consciousness that has seen thousands of characters come and then go. And perhaps the ultimate freedom is not finding yourself, but losing everything you never should have carried. The paradox of a life that never begins. You wake up each day with a sense of momentum. There are things to do, goals to achieve, improvements to make. You think of your life as a journey, always moving towards something: success, peace, love, understanding, a better version of yourself, a future that seems just within reach. You keep going because you believe that one day you will arrive. But no matter how far you go, that moment never comes. There are always more things to do, more things to fix, more things to become. You chase a beginning that you never reach. This is the paradox of a life that never begins. Realizing that the future you are waiting for, the version of life you keep trying to earn, may never come. Not because you are failing, but because it doesn't exist. Because the beginning you chase is just an illusion. And it always has been. Think about how often you postpone living. Once I graduate, once I find love, once I get a job, once I fix myself. You tie your vitality to conditions. You turn the present moment into a waiting room, a pattern of waiting. Life is always about to begin, but not yet. There's always something unfinished, something not good enough. And the story you tell yourself is that once you solve that last problem, once everything fits, then you will finally live. But then you solve it, and another problem appears. You reach the milestone, and joy fades. The job loses its excitement. The relationship becomes routine. Self-improvement becomes another form of self-rejection. You find yourself trapped in the same loop. Just one more change, one more advance, one more version of yourself, and then life can begin. But what if that's the trap? What if life has been happening all this time, and you've been too busy preparing to realize it? The truth is that there is no starting line, nor a definitive moment in which you are ready. You are always in the middle of it. This moment, messy, imperfect, unresolved, is the life you've been waiting for. Not because it is what you want, but because it is real. And the more you postpone your presence, the more you train yourself to live in delay, always waiting for permission to exist. It is not about giving up growth. It is not about abandoning your dreams. It is about recognizing that there is no later in which everything fits. Later is a thought, a projection, a mirage. It lives in your mind, not in time. You will never arrive because there is no place to arrive. Only the here exists. Only the now exists. Only this exists. The breath you're holding. The heartbeat you forgot to feel. The moment that will pass, whether you inhabit it or not. So here is the paradox. You are alive, but you're not living. Awake, but not present. You are waiting for a life that has already begun and that will end without your permission. And when it ends, it will not ask if you were prepared. It will not care how far you have come. You arrived. It will simply stop. In the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a thought, in the middle of a promise. And maybe, just maybe, the only thing preventing your life from beginning is the belief that it has not yet begun. The paradox of the voice that wonders if it is real. There is a strange moment, perhaps fleeting, perhaps persistent, in which the thought crosses your mind. Am I real? Not figuratively, nor as a passing joke, but as a real question, a sudden silent dislocation in which you feel that you are watching yourself from the outside. You are talking, but it doesn't seem to be you. You are smiling, but you are not sure why. You are listening to your own thoughts, but they seem like echoes. And in that pause, something deeper begins to whisper. What if this isn't me? What if all this happens without me? This is the paradox of a voice wondering if it's real. The spiral recognition that the voice inside your head, the one that narrates your life, asks questions and claims identity, may not be the basis of your reality, But the first illusion that the you that asks itself if you are real is itself another layer of the dream. Let's begin with the voice. It speaks constantly. It narrates your day, judges your actions, recalls memories, plans futures. It feels like a continuous thread, a stable anchor in time. But when you stop to observe it, you realize something unsettling. It never stops. It generates thoughts compulsively, like a background process that never asks permission. And when you try to silence it, make a pause and find stillness, it resists. Even the thought, "Am I real?" is just another line of dialogue, a reflection, a loop in the system. Now consider memory, the spine of self. Without memory, you would have neither continuity nor identity. But memory is notoriously unreliable. We misremember events. We invent details. Our brain rewrites the past to fit the present. The voice inside your head claims a stable self over time. But that self is built on a changing base, a memory of who you were, a belief about who you are, a hope of who you will become. None of that is solid. Everything is imaginary. And what about the body, the supposed container of self? You feel that you are here, behind your eyes, moving the threads. But neuroscience offers no proof that a self exists anywhere in the brain. There is no single place where the voice lives. There is no command center, only regions that are activated, sensations that arise, decisions that are made thousandths of a second before you're aware of them. You experience being a person, but you cannot locate the person you're supposed to be. And yet you continue onward. The voice continues. You think, you plan, you remember, you doubt, you ask. And by asking, you feed the illusion that someone is there to answer you. There's the paradox. If the voice inside your head asks if it is real, who is asking it? And who hears that question? Is there a deeper self beneath the words? Or is everything a hall of mirrors without an original behind the reflections? Some traditions say that the moment you ask yourself if you are real, you have already left the illusion. Others say that whoever asks is the illusion itself, desperate to demonstrate its own existence before fading. In any case, the question itself reveals the crack, the dissonance, the deep tacit truth that maybe, just maybe, you are not what you believe yourself to be. Maybe you were never the voice. Maybe you were never the story. Maybe you are only the silence that contains everything. The space in which the unanswered question arises, without a possible answer, and that continues to resonate. The paradox of the question that creates an interrogator. You ask questions every day, big, small, silent. What should I do with my life? Am I enough? What sense does all of this have? You ask these questions as if they arose from you, as if you were the one who formulated them. But stop and look closer. Where do these questions come from? And more importantly, who is asking them? This is the paradox of the question that creates the interrogator. The surprising possibility that the mere act of wondering who I am is what evokes the illusion that there is a you that can answer, that the seeker and the search may not be separated, but are born together at the same moment, and that what you call you may be just the echo of the question bouncing off the walls of consciousness. Let's start with the question of identity. The most persistent and primitive question of all. Who am I? You have done it since you have memory. You have done it during crises, during moments of tranquility, during growth, during collapse. But notice something. You never did it before language, before memory, before the mind learned to divide the world into subject and object. The baby does not ask, "Who am I?" It is simply pure experience, without separation. The question, "Who am I?" arises only when consciousness begins to reflect on itself. When thought turns inward, when the mind begins to fragment, to separate from its own presence, and then tries to make sense of that separation. But the instant the question appears, so does the illusion of an interrogator. Like a ripple in a calm pond that creates the illusion of depth. The thought, "Who am I?" creates the need for an eye to ask it, although such an entity cannot be found. Try to find the interrogator. Close your eyes. Sit in silence. Feel how the question arises. Who is asking this? You may feel a tension in your chest, or behind your eyes, or a vague sense of center. But that feeling is just another appearance, another thought, another image. There is no thinker, no nucleus, only consciousness. And within it, a question, a movement, a search. Even stranger, the content of the question defines the shape of the self. If you ask, "Am I good enough?" you create a self that fears not being. If you ask, "What is my purpose?" you build a self that believes it must justify its existence. The question sculpts identity. The deeper you go into the question, the more subtly you create the illusion of an interrogator. And yet, the self you're trying to discover is always one step behind, always flashing in the rearview mirror, always built by the very tools you use to expose it. So, what happens if the question stops? That is the terrifying possibility. If the question ceases, without answer, without satisfaction, but completely abandoned, what remains? There is no need for an eye if there is no inquiry, no inner dialogue, no narrative that draws attention inward. What remains is not a void, nor numbness, but something more. Stillness being not the self as a concept, but the self as presence, immediate, empty, complete. And yet, the mind resists this because letting go of the question is like letting go of identity itself. The mind believes that the question is the self, that stopping asking is ceasing to exist. But that is the final trick, because only when the question disappears do you realize that you were never the one asking it. You were the consciousness all the time. Therein lies the paradox. You think you are asking the question to discover the truth. But, in reality, the question is asking you to exist. And when it finally ends, without answer, but dissolved, the self it built also silences. And what remains isn't who is asking. What remains is who is always there, in silence, observing, waiting, without need of a name. The paradox of the world that exists only when you look at it. You wake up in the morning and take it for granted that the world has always been there. The ceiling above you, the light that enters through the window, the floor under your feet. Everything was waiting for you, like a movie on pause that resumes the moment you open your eyes. You believe the same about everything. The city continues bustling while you are asleep. The strangers continue with their lives without you knowing. The stars continue shining even when you don't look. The universe is vast, real, and constant. You're only an observer passing through it. But what if that assumption's wrong? What if the world you experience isn't something external that you enter, but something internal that activates the moment you pay attention? What if, like a stage in the darkness, reality appears only when the focus of your consciousness rests on it? What if the world does not exist passively behind the curtain, but is actively generated as you move through it? This is the paradox of the world that exists only when you look, the quiet and disorienting possibility that reality isn't out there as you think, that it arises with you, through you, and perhaps only thanks to you. Not because you are imagining it, but because consciousness could be a necessary ingredient for its appearance. A co-creator of everything you take for granted. Let's begin with your senses. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. They seem like channels toward an external world. You see a tree and say, "It is out there." You hear a sound and say, "That is happening around me." But those are interpretations, not direct access. What you call seeing are photons that hit your retina, triggering electrical impulses, which your brain converts into color, shape, and movement. But color doesn't exist out there. Neither does sound. The outside world is not red or blue, nor loud or soft. They are particles and waves, forces and fields. None of that looks or feels like anything until it's interpreted by a brain. And the brain isn't limited to receiving the world. It builds it up. Your perception is composed of fragments assembled like a dream in real time. There's a blind spot in your vision where the optic nerve connects. You don't see it because your brain fills it in. You think you see clearly continuously, but what you really see is rather a hallucination that your brain constantly updates to maintain coherence. And you trust that hallucination more than reality itself. Even your sensation of being in a body, of occupying space, and moving through time is a model. When you close your eyes, the room disappears. Not because it ceases to exist in some objective way, but because your experience of it stops. If you never opened your eyes again, how would you know it was there? If you never entered another room, how could you prove that it exists except for your memory or belief? And then there's quantum physics, where reality becomes even stranger. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles behave differently depending on whether they're being observed. When they're not measured, photons exist in a state of probability, a wave of potential results. But the act of observing them, of looking at them, collapses the wave into a single reality. It is as if the universe waited to be seen before deciding what it is. Your observation isn't limited to recording reality. It determines that. It is not poetry. It is science. Now think about your experience. You live in a bubble of perception. Never, not even once, have you been outside your own consciousness. You have never experienced a moment, a color, a sound, or a thought outside of yourself. Everything you know of the world is mediated by your nervous system. Even the idea that the world continues as you sleep is a belief, a story that your mind tells you upon waking. You did not experience those hours in which you were unconscious. They were a void, a gap. And, nevertheless, you assumed the world continued turning. Why? Because it is comforting. Because everyone agrees to believe it. Because without that belief, something truly disorienting starts to fall apart. What falls apart? The notion of objectivity, of a solid world out there that's separate from you? But what if separation is the illusion? What if the world and the consciousness of the world are two sides of the same coin, inseparable, that arise together and are mutually dependent? You see yourself as a thing inside the world. But what if the world is something that happens inside you, or more precisely with you, not in your body or mind, but in the field of consciousness that includes both the observer and observed? You see a tree, you see your hand, you see a thought, different objects, the same consciousness. The only constant is the space in which they appear, and therein lies a paradox. You are trying to understand the world as if you were not a part, as if it could exist without you. But in your direct experience, the world exists only as it appears. The things that you believe are outside, the stars, the oceans, the strangers, only exist for you when they enter your field of consciousness. Everything else is history, inference, belief. You can call it objective, but it lives within the limits of your perception. So what are you? You're not a person who walks through the world, nor a brain inside a skull, nor a subject separate from the object, but the context in which the world arises, the space in which color appears, the presence in which sound unfolds, the light in which form takes shape. Maybe the world isn't waiting for you. Maybe it's you, not the body, nor the name, nor thoughts that come and go, but the consciousness in which all things are seen and without which nothing is known. Maybe the world exists only when you look, and maybe you exist only when you see it. A single event, which unfolds always and only now. The paradox of who observes time's passage. Time seems like the most constant force of your life. It advances relentlessly, marking the step in the background. Whatever you do, you age. Things change. The moments escape. You see how seconds fall like sand through glass. And you try to keep up with them, running towards the next milestone, regretting what's gone, anticipating what is to come. But beneath the surface of this linear story, a strange question starts to arise. If everything changes with time, why do I keep feeling like the same person who sees everything pass by? This is the paradox of who observes the passage of time. The disturbing finding is that, although your body ages, your thoughts evolve, and your memories fade, there is something in you that seems to remain the same. The observer, the witness, the silent thread running through all stages of life. You don't feel that you have changed as much as you know you have, but that knowledge never changes. It simply keeps observing. Start with your childhood. You can imagine moments, a bicycle, the face of your parents, a classroom. That child was afraid of things that you have overcome already. He believed in ideas that you have left behind already. His body was smaller, his voice sharper, his world simpler. And yet, when you remember those moments, you say, that was me, not a different person, not a historical artifact. You. But what part of you is really the same? Neither your body, nor your thoughts, nor your habits. Everything measurable has changed. However, a part of you feels that it has never moved, as if you had been standing in the same place while time flowed around you. Now think about how time appears in your direct experience. You never see it. You never touch it. You only notice the change, the movement of objects, the aging of your face in the mirror, the reorganization of memories. Time is deduced. It is not experienced as a substance. It is the framework that your mind uses to organize movement. But you, the one who observes, do not seem to move with it. You don't feel older in a direct, experiential sense. You feel constant, centered still, and yet the world keeps changing. People leave, your body changes, your thoughts transform into new beliefs. Life is a long act of letting go, but something remains to observe the letting go. To say that this is ending or that this is new, what is that? Where does that voice reside? What is the nature of what endures through change, but does not change itself? Some traditions call it consciousness. Others call it awareness. But whatever name is used, it points to the same mystery, to the fact that you are time's witness. But you never see yourself change in the same way that everything else does. You do not experience your own evolution at the moment it occurs. You only notice it later, in retrospect, through the contrast in memory. And yet, even memory is elusive. It is a story, not a record. You remember the memory more than the events themselves. So, who is this self that remains the same while forgetting everything else? This is where the paradox deepens. If you're not your body because it changes, nor your mind because it forgets and contradicts itself, then what are you? And if this self that is witness has no content of its own, no form, no change, is it even something? Or is it just the space in which something appears? Perhaps the self is not something in time. Perhaps it is what allows time to appear, the canvas that holds a painting, but that is not part of the scene. Maybe you're not on time. Maybe time is within you. And if that is true, then death, the ultimate end of time, may not be your end. Because what you call you has never existed in time. It has only been observing in silence, immobile, while the clock marks hours, while the mirror changes, while everything passes like shadows on a wall that never moves. And that wall, that stillness, maybe it is what you have been all along. The paradox of the one life that seems many. You look back and your life does not seem like a continuous thing to you. It seems to you chapters, fragments, versions of yourself in which you have lived and that you have then abandoned in silence. The person you were in childhood, innocent, fearful, full of wonder, now seems distant, like a character you remember from a book. The teenager you were, temperamental, impulsive, sure of things that you now laugh at. The person you were only 5 years ago could make decisions that the current version would never consider. And, nevertheless, you call all of them I. This is the paradox of the one life that seems many. The silent and irresolvable truth that your life has been lived by many selves, each one sincerely believing that he was the real I, before dissolving and becoming a memory. That the story that you consider your life is rather a collection of lives lived in sequence, vaguely connected by memory, vaguely united by continuity, but totally separated in form, values, understanding, and even awareness. Start with this. Approximately every 7 years, almost all the cells in your body have been replaced. You're not made of the same stuff, and your identity has also transformed. The beliefs that previously anchored you are now irrelevant. The people without whom you thought you could not live are now strangers. The habits to which you previously clung have disappeared. New ones have taken their place. You wear different clothes. You think differently. You respond to life with a different emotional vocabulary. And, nevertheless, something persists. A mysterious affirmation of being the same person. But on what basis? Your memories. They are inconsistent, selective, biased. You forget more than you remember. And much of what you remember is reconstructed, altered, edited. You remember the story, not reality. The outline, not the details. And that story has also changed. It is told differently at different times. It is remodeled with retrospect. It is softened with nostalgia. It is distorted with pain. Your body is unknown to you. The body of the child that you are no longer exists. The voice you heard when you were a teenager is not the voice you hear now. Your skin, your face, your posture belong to a self that you have already left behind. And still you say, I. Still, you claim ownership of a continuum of selves that resemble each other less than the people who are sitting next to you. Each self was sincere. Each self believed that he was the definitive version, and each one died. And yet you are still here. So, who or what is the common thread? What is it that lives all these lives, but is not completely defined by any of them? Is it consciousness, presence, something deeper? Is it simply the illusion of continuity born from the mind's desire to protect you from the unbearable thought that you are not what endures? That only the illusion of yourself does. This paradox sharpens when you realize that you are living another life, even now. One day, the person you are today, with your problems, your routines, your opinions, will also disappear. And the you of the future will remember this version vaguely, if it remembers it at all. You may look back at this exact moment with indifference, shame, or compassion, but you will not be this version again. That is not hypothetical. It is safe. This self, like all those that preceded it, will disappear. So what remains? Perhaps the truth is that you are not the character in the story. You are the changing lens through which the story is told. You are not the fixed self that observes the changes. You are the change itself, a river in constant transformation, an endless succession of me that arise, create, and dissolve, leaving behind only the echo of a life that never stopped enough to be named. And perhaps, if you let go of the need to be one thing, you can finally become what you have always been, everything you ever were and none of what ever remained. The paradox of the one who cannot be found. You have sought your identity all your life in relationships, in achievements, in ideas, in reflection. You have tried identities as if they were clothes. You have tested beliefs as if they were tools. You have followed maps drawn by other people, teachers, religions, philosophies, each one promising to take you back to your essence, to your central and stable self. You have said things like, I just need to find myself, as if you were something lost behind a door that you have forgotten how to open. But what if the door does not lead anywhere? What if there is no self behind it? This is the paradox of who cannot be found, the disarming understanding that the self you seek may not exist as you believe, not as a thing, not as a center, not as an object that can be grabbed, but only as an activity, something that arises, flashes, disappears, and, nevertheless, convinces you that it has always been there. Let's start with the idea of locating the self. When you say I, where exactly do you point? Most point towards the chest or the head, the heart or the brain. But if a surgeon opened your skull, he would find tissue, not identity. Neurons, not narrative. Thought patterns, not a thinker. No surgeon, no scientist, no mystic has ever found the self. Only the functioning of the mind and body, like a machine that works regardless of whether there is someone at home. But it seems that there is someone at home. There is the trap. There's a vivid sensation of being, not only of perceiving, but of being who perceives. That sense of ownership is deep, primitive, difficult to doubt, but is also fragile. When you look at it directly in silence and meditation, in moments of deep stillness, it fades. You find thoughts, yes, feelings, sensations, but there is no one who thinks nor who feels, only the content and the awareness of it. Try it. Sit still. Look inward, not at the thoughts, but at the space in which they arise. Try to locate who is aware, not conceptually, but directly. You will not find anyone, not because you're doing it wrong, but because the self has never been there as an object that can be found. It was always a verb, a movement, a mirage arising from memory and continuity. The brain creates the illusion of a center so that life is navigable easily. It helps you remember, predict, and protect. But that center is a process, a collage of impressions constantly updated. You are not a stable self. You are the echo of a pattern that rewrites itself from moment to moment. And even the voice in your head, the one that says, it's just another thought, a line of code in the software. You're no more than the sensation of hunger or just the sound of traffic. This is not nihilism. It is not the death of meaning. It is the birth of something stranger and more honest. That what you are is not something in the experience. You're the field of experience itself, not a character within the dream, but the space in which the dream unfolds. The light that illuminates every moment, even when no one is watching. And here is the paradox. The moment you stop looking for yourself, something quieter and far more real begins to shine. It is not a self, nor a person. It is consciousness itself, still without form, open, and all the search vanishes. You were never lost. They never found you because you were never anything. The paradox is the question that has no answer. At some point, it finds you, perhaps in the middle of a sleepless night, perhaps in the stillness after a loss, perhaps during a moment of inexplicable awe, or while you look into the eyes of someone you love. It does not knock on the door. It does not scream. It whispers softly, insistently, a single question. What am I? Not in a superficial sense. Not your name, your job, your story, but something deeper, something indescribable, something that does not ask for an answer, but demands one anyway. This is the paradox of the question that has no answer. The existential koan that is found in the center of your being. The question that you once asked yourself sincerely begins to dismantle everything on which you have built your identity. Because as much as you try to answer it with thoughts, roles, stories, or ideas, the answer evades you. And the more you delve into yourself, the more you realize that what you are looking for is not found where you have been looking. It starts with the typical answers. You say, I am I. But that is a label, a shortcut. You say, I am this body. But the body is constantly changing. The cells of your skin, your bones, your organs are replaced and rebuilt in cycles. You say, I am my mind. But your thoughts contradict each other. Your beliefs evolve. Your memories are reshaped each time you evoke them. What you believed 10 years ago may seem absurd to you today. Does that mean that you were another person then? If so, where's that person? Then, you refine the question. Am I what changes or what perceived change? And suddenly you find yourself in a strange territory because every time you try to understand the observer, you realize that you are using the mind to chase the mind. You can describe what you observe, the thoughts, emotions, and sensations, but not who observes. The closer you get, the further it goes, like a shadow that vanishes when you turn to look at it. In some traditions, this is known as self-inquiry. It is not about answering the question, but about exhausting the illusion that there is an answer in the way we expect, because the mind wants to land. It wants certainty and identity. It wants something to point to and say, this is me. But the question does not work like that. It is not a puzzle to solve. It is a mirror that reflects everything until you begin to realize that the mirror is empty. And yet, you keep living, making decisions, feeling emotions, speaking as if there was someone solid behind the words. I think, I want, I believe, but who is this I? Is it the body that changes? The thoughts that flicker? The voice that never quite matches who speaks? Or is it the consciousness behind it all, silent, open, unattainable? This is where the paradox intensifies. The question, what am I, is formulated precisely by that which tries to discover. The seeker is also the sought. It is like a flame trying to burn itself, or a camera trying to photograph itself without a mirror. Any answer you give becomes part of the illusion, a concept, a belief, a substitute for the mystery that refuses to be named. And yet, asking the question changes you. It creates a crack in the facade. You begin to see how much of your life has been built on assumptions, not only about the world, but about who perceives it. You begin to realize the masks you wear, the roles you play, the stories you repeat, not because they are true, but because they are comfortable, because they anchor you to an identity in which you no longer fully believe. In the end, you stop looking for an answer, not because you have given up, but because you have understood that it is not necessary. The question has fulfilled its function. It has dismantled the scaffolding. What remains is not an answer, but a presence, a stillness, an openness that cannot be named, but contains everything. You're not a thing. You're not a label. You're not a collection of traits or memories. You're the space in which all that appears and disappears. And that space does not need an answer. It does not need to say, I am this. It is simply silent, clear, unbreakable. Perhaps that is the ultimate truth. You are the question. You are the silence behind it. And you are the one who has never been missing. The paradox of awakening that has always been there. You spend your life chasing something. Sometimes it looks like success. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it is love, clarity, belonging, freedom. Whatever form it takes, the feeling is the same. I have not arrived yet. There is a tension in your chest, a subtle restlessness, a slight hum of incompleteness that drives you forward. Once I fix this, do you think that once I figure it out, once I become the person I'm supposed to be, then I'll finally arrive? And so you search, you read, you grow. You meditate, you reflect, you shed layers, you get closer, or so it seems. But the strangest thing happens when you finally stop. Not when you give up, but when the search itself disappears. Not because you have found what you were looking for, but because the search begins to seem unnecessary. The hunger that drove you for so long begins to dissipate. And in its place, there is not an answer, but a silence wide, still, already complete. This is the paradox of awakening that has always been there. The understanding that what you have been searching for all your life, the freedom you have been pursuing, the self you have been trying to become was never lost. It was never in another place. It was never hidden. It was always here. But you couldn't see it because you were too busy searching. Imagine a person frantically searching for their glasses, retracing their steps, turning the room upside down, crawling on the floor in despair, only to discover that the glasses have been on their face all along. That's what this is. Only it's not glasses what you have been searching for. It's yourself. All your life, you have confused becoming with being. You have believed that you must earn peace, that you must create value, that the present moment is a springboard to a better place. But what if the present is not a bridge, but the destination? What if there is no other place to arrive? What if the search for meaning has obscured the meaning that has always shone through you? The mind hates this. It wants tasks, projects, something to hold on to, a future to move towards. It says that that cannot be. I'm not ready. I'm not enlightened enough. I haven't healed enough. I keep thinking terrible things. I keep getting angry. I keep feeling small. But the truth is that there is no version of you in the future that is more you than the one reading these words right now. All the effort has taken place within the same consciousness that you were trying to reach. And here's the strangest thing. Nothing changes, yet everything changes. The work, the body, the fears, the thoughts are still there. The voice in your head keeps narrating. The world keeps turning, but everything is a little softer, a little wider, because now you are not inside the story, desperately trying to fix it. You're the space that contains the story, watching how it unfolds. And in that space, everything has its place. Even your confusion, even your flaws, even your search, especially your search. Because the search was not a mistake. It was sacred. It took you in circles until the circle dissolved. It gave you stories to overcome, walls to tear down, masks to take off. And when it finally ran out, when it put you on your knees, that was the gateway. Not because you had passed a test, but because the search had done all it could. It had taken you as far away from yourself as possible, so that you could finally see that you had never left. And now what? Now breathe. Now listen. Now stop looking for what you are. There are no thunders. There are no cosmic revelations. Only this, the ordinary miracle of presence, the quiet vitality behind your eyes, the strange, humble joy of realizing that everything you thought you had to become, you already are. You always have been, and that the journey was never about arriving. It was about remembering the paradox of illusion that frees you. You spend your life trying to be real, authentic, and to be yourself. You reject what seems false to you. You look for what seems true to you. You think, if I can strip away the lies, if I can stop pretending, if I can finally be who I really am, then I'll be free. You work on yourself. You heal. You reflect. You deconstruct. You get closer. Maybe you feel lighter, more aware. But somewhere deep, the question persists. What exactly is being released? Who is this self that I'm trying to free? This is the paradox of the illusion that frees you. The final turn at the end of road. That what you're trying to free may never have been trapped. That what you're trying to become may never have been missing, and that the one who longs for freedom may not exist in the way you have always assumed. You have believed for so long that there is an essential self, a solid identity buried under fear, shame, conditioning, a real self waiting to be discovered. But every time you remove a layer, you find another. Every time you define yourself, the definition fades. You realize that your beliefs come from your parents. Your values are inherited. Your voice is the echo of those who shaped you. So what remains? Where is the authentic self? You search, you inquire, you wait. But the deeper you go, the more things dissolve. Thoughts arise, but you are not thinking them. Emotions surface, but you have not invited them. Desires change, identities transform. Even your deepest convictions evolve over time. You are not a thing. You are a current. A changing and flickering process, a series of appearances, and behind them, only silence. So what happens when you stop trying to be real? Not out of defeat, but because the whole search seems unnecessary. At first, it is unsettling, like standing on a floor that slowly disappears. But then something strange happens. In the absence of a fixed self, there is space. Space to breathe, to move, to feel, without clinging or defending yourself. You no longer have to be true to yourself because you see that yourself is not a fixed point, but a canvas. One that is constantly painted, erased, and repainted. The illusion that you have been dismantling, the self that you have been trying to find or fix, was never a mistake. It was a story, a useful story, a container that helped you survive. It gave structure to the experience. It gave it meaning. It helped you grow. But now it is transparent. And instead of needing it to be real, you can simply observe it, like a dream in which you are awake. And by observing it, you discover something radical. Freedom does not come from being real. It comes from not needing to be. It comes from letting go of control, from seeing the illusion and continuing to dance within it. You laugh. You cry. You show yourself to the world. You play roles. You say I and mine. But now you know that everything is part of the theater. You can wear the mask without believing it is your face. And freedom is not in escaping the illusion. Freedom is in knowing that it is an illusion, and finally being at peace with it. The paradox of silence that says it all. There comes a moment, not always planned, when words stop working. You try to explain something, a feeling, a truth, an understanding, and all the phrases fail. You begin to feel that what you are trying to express cannot be captured by language. Not entirely, not completely. It is not just that you do not know how to say it. It is that it cannot be said. And at that moment, something profound happens. You remain silent, not out of confusion, but out of clarity, out of reverence. Because some truths are not said. They are heard in the silence that follows. This is the paradox of silence that says it all. The discovery that the most real, the most honest, the most you cannot be expressed in words. That the essence that you have been surrounding with questions, stories, and philosophies does not live in language. It lives just below it, in the stillness, in the space between thoughts, in the pause before the next phrase begins. You have spent your life in the noise. Thoughts, ideas, opinions, beliefs, narratives about who you are, what matters, what is real. You have convinced yourself that everything makes sense. You have reasoned about heartbreak, philosophy, identity, even existence. You have said your truths, and sometimes that has helped you. But over time, you begin to feel that the truth you most yearn for cannot be built from concepts. It is too big, too intimate, too present. Words are useful. They point. They teach. They connect. But all words are symbols. And the more you delve, the more you realize you are not looking for symbols. You look for that to which they point, what is behind them. And the moment you stop chasing the meaning in language, you fall into meaning itself, not into something you think about, something you feel, but something that is with or without your feeling. You can experience it in nature. Stare at the ocean, listen to the wind, realize there is nothing more to say. Or in pain, when no consolation can be offered and only presence remains. Or in love, not in romantic drama, but in the silent recognition between two beings who understand each other without explanations. In those moments, silence is not perceived as emptiness. It is perceived as full. It is not absence, but depth. It is not nothing, but everything. And there is the paradox. Silence, which seems to deny expression, turns out to be the purest expression. It is not the opposite of meaning. It is the collapse of all minor meanings into a vast, tacit truth. It says, you're not your story. You're not your thoughts. You're not the roles you have played or the wounds you suffered. You are this consciousness, this breath, this still center from which everything arises and fades. And in silence, there is nothing to add, because nothing is missing. Perhaps that is why, in the end, the most powerful answers do not come as conclusions, but as stillness. Not because you have found the truth, but because you have finally stopped trying to explain it. And there it was, silent, undeniable, already complete. The paradox of the end that was never going to arrive. You spend your life waiting for something, a moment, a change, a conclusion that finally gives meaning to everything. You imagine it in vague forms: success, awakening, peace, closure, arrival. You imagine that one day you will get there. Anxiety will subside. The questions will cease. The pain in your chest will soften. You will look around and think, yes, this is it. But no matter how far you go, no matter what you achieve, the horizon keeps moving. The end does not come. Or if it arrives, it is not as you had imagined. It feels incomplete. This is the paradox of the end that was never going to arrive. The recognition that the conclusion you have been looking for has not been delayed, is not hidden, has not been lost, but is impossible. Because there is no final chapter, no last page, no definitive version of yourself that resolves everything with a clean and satisfactory bow. And the more you pursue that end, the more you lose sight of the fact that life was never written as a story. From the moment you are born, you are given a narrative structure. Beginnings, knots, outcomes, problems, climaxes, resolutions. All the books, movies, lessons, and beliefs tell you to keep going because one day everything will make sense. One day you will become the person you are destined to be. One day the confusion will clear up. Someday the pain will cease. Someday, everything you suffered will make sense. And so you keep going forward. You improve. You wait. You endure. You fantasize about a moment when the interior noise finally fades. When you can rest, not only physically, but existentially. When the fight can end. But this is the truth. You have already had hundreds of endings. Versions of yourself have died again and again. Chapters have been closed. Dreams have collapsed. A whole life has passed in the space of a few years. And still, here you are awake, breathing, searching. Because the story does not end. It keeps being rewritten. New thoughts appear. New desires replace the old ones. Even your deepest ideas end up losing their shine. Yes, you grow, but each arrival becomes the starting line for the next. You never land. You never settle. Even when you think you have finished, a new layer of longing appears, something else to solve, something else to aspire to. And here is the paradox. The end you seek does not exist because it was never destined to, because you were never destined to conclude. You were destined to develop, to spiral, to expand towards increasingly deeper layers of consciousness. Not to end, but to keep discovering what it means to be here. When you finally see it, something calms down. Not because you have reached the end, but because you realize that you do not need it. You no longer need the promise of finality to feel at peace in the present moment. You stop measuring how far you have come by how close you are to a conclusion that was never more than an idea. You begin to see your life not as a story that advances towards a climax, but as music with no other destiny than this exact note, this measure, this breath. You realize that you are never being tested. There is nothing to prove, nothing to win, nothing to finish. Only this exists, this moment, this body, this vitality, and in it there is no end, but infinite beginnings. So perhaps the peace that you have been looking for all this time is not found at the end of the road, but in the moment when you stop trying to arrive. Perhaps freedom is not the conclusion. Perhaps it is the permission to never need it.